What is up, everybody? John the Morgile here, doing a video response to one of the most appalling, despicable displays of vulgar ignorance and just sheer globe-headedness and stubbornness that I've really seen in a long time, crammed into 15 minutes. So, I mean, that really says a lot when you can get that much liarrhea and ignorance crammed into 15 minutes. The reason I'm doing this is a friend of mine, Jason, texted me today and asked me if I had seen the debate last night, which would have been Monday, January the 23rd, on Jeranism Raw between Jeranism and Zachary K. Hubbard, which I told my friend Jason I had not. I actually still haven't seen the debate. And honestly, I wasn't really too familiar with Zachary K. Hubbard. The name sort of rings a bell, right? It sort of rang a bell, but I haven't seen his work, never spoken with him, not familiar with him. And so what I did do is I just sort of checked him out on YouTube, and the first video that I found of his was this called "The Delusional Flat Earth Community: Afterthoughts on Jeranism Debate About the Flat Earth PSYOP." And I'll put a link to that in the descriptions, as well as a link to the debate that he had with Jaron. First off, I'll say that I feel sorry for people like Zachary K. Hubbard because they are unable to humor theories or consider hypotheses that are outside of what they believe due to stubbornness and due to essentially a lifetime of programming mandated by the federally run school system, by the school curriculum. And so, it's the major PSYOP, the terrible deception, the huge mother of all PSYOPs actually is the whole heliocentric Copernican principle, Big Bang evolution theory, theories. I mean, those are the PSYOPs that have been implanted into our ID, into our psyche since we were very young children, and that's a real shame. Now, the beauty of it is that our generation has been blessed with this revelation that there is actually another way of looking at things than the Copernican principle. Because to be very honest, the Copernican theory, which scientists throughout history do have a bent towards, it is a law of physics, this Copernican principle, this mediocrity principle, this law that states that the Earth must not hold any special or significant or unique or even remotely significant place in the universe. That is a law of physics, and so by definition, theoretical physicists have a bent towards the opposite of science, because science is supposed to entail humoring different hypotheses to see which better match reality. And the way that you do this is through experiments and following data, following the facts where they lead you. And unfortunately, theoretical physics based on a Copernican principle is the opposite of science, because people like Zachary Hubbard just simply refuse to consider theories that are outside of their scope of reality. Now, I will get to rolling this clip and rebutting Zachary Hubbard as we go along, but I will say that one of the toughest things to get across to people is not flat Earth. One of my specialities is disproving the heliocentric model. I mean, it's really quite easy to do, and so if you can prove that the Earth isn't a spinning sphere in outer space, then is it really necessary to even prove flat Earth? Or should we, just take that, the total debunking of the heliocentric model as at least a starting point to start looking at other ideas, to start looking at other hypotheses? I mean, even if one single premise of the heliocentric model is debunked, then the rest of it falls. I mean, it all rides on, every bit of the heliocentric theory, whether it's axial rotation, the precession of the equinoxes, the speed of the spin at the equator, allegedly, the cycle of the moon. I mean, all of this stuff has to be precisely what they say it is, and if one single thing is shown to be false, then the rest of it falls apart. Now, that's the beautiful thing about the flat Earth reality, is it's very plain and simple. The Earth is simply a stationary plane, and we flat Earthers don't claim to know what the stars are. And frankly, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, you may not know this, talking to people like Zachary K. Hubbard, but you don't know what the stars or the sun are either. Now, you claim to believe in a theoretical thing called hot atomic fusion, which has never been demonstrated in a lab. It is theoretical. And so for you to say that you know that the sun and the stars are hot atomic fusion is ridiculous. Hot atomic fusion only exists in the realm of theory. In fact, if you look at the evidence, even atomic fission or an atomic bomb, such a thing exists merely in the realm of theory and propaganda. And the only thing that we have that is realistic in terms of nuclear, which is a misnomer, is nuclear energy, which I've touched on this in other videos, but you're merely taking a radioactive isotope, encasing it into a small area which creates heat. That energy is transferred to boil water, and then the steam turns a turbine, so you just have a very expensive advanced form of steam power. There's no splitting of theoretical atoms involved at all. And so I guess what I'm getting at is most of what we were taught in school in terms of theoretical physics, everything from the atom to the atom bomb to the planet Jupiter to the sun and how it was formed and how galaxies were formed and how dark matter, theoretically holds galaxies together, all the way back to the Big Bang and everything in between, including evolution. All of that is conjecture. And all of that is backed by nothing more than circumstantial evidence, confirmation bias, and a world full of people who were tricked since they were toddlers into believing in the most absurd, preposterous thing, such as you live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere in the vacuum of outer space. So let's get started on this video. I'm going to roll this button, and I may end up cutting in some other clips as well of Zachary K. Hubbard's genius sarcasm there.
Hey, truth seekers, welcome back. Zach here. Last night, Monday, January 23rd, 2017, I went on Jeranism's radio program to have a discussion about the flat earth, which I maintain is a psychological operation meant to divide, distract, and discredit the truth community.
Wow. Okay, so you're going to take the position that the flat earth is a psyop. Okay, let's just say hypothetically, for argument's sake, I'm not asking you to be a flat earther, I'm just saying hypothetically for argument's sake, let's just say that it's true. Let's just say that the earth isn't actually a spinning sphere in outer space, but it is indeed a stationary plane. No curvature, no axial rotation, no orbiting, no galactic frame of reference, no Big Bang, none of that. Let's just suppose, for argument's sake, that that is all theory, which indeed it is. All of that is theory. And let's just suppose, for argument's sake, that flat Earth happens to be true. For you to say that that is a psyop is the most ironic, close-minded, it would be comical were it not so sad, situation I've ever seen. It's hard to find an analogy to show the level of cognitive dissonance and just refusal to look at evidence and refusal to follow the scientific method, and yet call others who are following the scientific method science denying idiots, um, it's preposterous. But let's just assume that it's true. Let's assume that the Earth is flat and stationary and we're right. Let's just say hypothetically that you're wrong about this. Um, then the psyop is definitely the whole idea of this heliocentric Copernican principle Big Bang model, where the universe, in quotes, is governed by gravity and chaos and mere chance, and life itself essentially was at one point inanimate soup made out of minerals that sprang into existence, somehow writing billions of lines of DNA code to form even a single cell organism. That makes perfect sense. Yet, when you do start to look at the evidence objectively and start to consider that perhaps you may have been fooled about everything, starting with the Big Bang, leading to the formation of stars, planets in general, the lights in the night sky, that's all the first-hand evidence you have of space. Now, there has been a huge propaganda campaign going on for our entire lives, really since the early 50s, to indoctrinate people into this really firm belief in infinite space and alien worlds, and that the Earth is just this insignificant spinning rubble pile, in some galaxy, one of billions of galaxies, making us the definition of insignificant, which really leads to a line of thought that is sort of nihilistic, if you will, meaning that nothing has any meaning. In fact, I would argue that the heliocentric model and everything that comes with it is the root cause of nihilism itself, if you want to know the truth. And, although I do identify as a Christian, and I have my entire life, I've held atheistic viewpoints my entire life simply because I have adhered to the standard scientific models of things for the majority of my life. Now, in the last 2 years, I've happened to look at evidence objectively. Two simple things, and I know you argue this, is the lack of curvature and the lack of axial rotation. These two things alone, debunk the heliocentric model, regardless of what you think the stars in the southern skies are doing. If there is no curvature, then the lights in the night sky are not what we've been told. We're not on a planet spinning around a galaxy like all the other lights in the night sky. Even if the moon is a sphere, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Earth is a sphere whatsoever. That's circumstantial evidence. It's a leap of confirmation bias. And, when you do test for curvature, it doesn't exist. When you make physical experiments, test for axial rotation.
Oh, I see that one. That one's coming straight down. No, a little over this way. Oh! That was awesome.
Supersonic axial rotation at the equator and even in the United States, it simply doesn't exist. So the fact is that you are indeed wrong, and the fact that you claim that flat Earth is a psyop is, again, it's very ironic, sad, ridiculous, and it makes me wonder about you, and I really hope that you're able to really put the lens over the heliocentric model. Really scrutinize your belief systems, because again, if one single tenet or premise of the heliocentric model is shown to be fallacious, especially when NASA is caught faking just about everything from their inception, starting with the Nazi origins of NASA, leading up to the faked Apollo hoax missions, then on into the faked Pioneer 10 missions, unmanned mission to Jupiter, allegedly traveling almost 400 million miles through 90 million miles of errant asteroids through the asteroid belt, and beaming back pictures what are obvious hoaxes of this planet Jupiter, that this is what NASA's been up to, and this is what they're still up to, raking in $20 billion a year now from taxpayer money alone, for planned trips to Mars that will never happen. It's always in the next 20 years. They were planning trips to Mars since they've had that shtick since the 70s and the 80s. So what makes you think they're going to, take your ass to Mars? I mean, it's ridiculous. So anyway, I just want to let you know a psyop, a psychological operation from the government is going to be something that is going to have an end result that the government wants. Now, you claim that that end result is to muddy the waters of the truth movement. Now, let's just suppose that the Earth is actually flat and stationary. Now, how could that truth, this ultimate truth, how could this truth be muddying the waters of any truth movement? This is the greatest deception of the entire world, and it really does encompass and house all of the other deceptions. Everything from the Freemasons and the Illuminati running the world through the Vatican, the Washington, D.C., and the City of London, citadels, city-states, the trifecta of power. You may include Israel in there as well. These entities, this sort of maritime admiralty corporation that's running the world through sort of inverted fascism or corporate fascism, corpo-fascism, these entities, the last thing that they want is an aware, awake public. And when people wake up to the fact that the Earth isn't a spinning sphere and all of theoretical science, including Einstein and all of his bizarre theories of space and time being an intermesh fabric of nothing, all of this is malarkey. And, Einstein was pushed and promoted sort of like the Backstreet Boys or like a boy band as this genius, when in fact, he was a patent clerk. He dropped out of high school. He was known to beat his wife. He was known, people that knew him claimed, his teachers, his people that knew him claimed that he was no genius. He merely stole other people's ideas during his time as a patent clerk and took credit for them. But that's besides the point. It really just goes to show that this truth, this flat earth truth, as crazy as it sounds, I know how stupid it sounds, trust me, when you realize that your entire education has been one large deception, then people like yourself claiming that this is a psyop to steer people away from the truth is the most preposterous, ridiculous thing. And in fact, if there is government involvement with the flat earth movement, it would be people holding your position, which would be people trying to hold others back from looking at the evidence. I'm not asking anyone to be a flat earther. I'm simply asking people to look at the evidence objectively, and I don't mean Wikipedia, the Flat Earth Society, and find some preposterous, ridiculous malarkey like gravity is caused by the Earth accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second. That's the sort of ridiculous, red herring, bullshit arguments that misinformation campaigns come up with in order to discredit the truth. Now, the fact is, what goes up must come down isn't argued by flat earthers. However, it is the theory of Einsteinian gravity as a warping of space-time that causes what goes up to come down. Now, in the flat earth model, whether you're aware of this or not, the ultimate cause for what goes down is in fact the natural laws of density and buoyancy. So higher density objects will tend down, while lower density gases and objects like helium will tend up. And there still must be a nudge for density and buoyancy to work. Another example would be a 1,000-ton ship floating on water, or a fairly heavy airplane flying through the air, or a hot air balloon raising in the air. This is all governed by density and buoyancy, has nothing to do with gravity. Now, in order for density and buoyancy to work, you have to have a tendency for higher density objects to find their way down, and that tendency is not gravitic, it's actually electromagnetic. Okay, and this has recently been discovered and sort of uncovered and explained by a few people, one of them being Bob Nodell. And the way that I understand it is that and I've understood this for quite a while, that the Earth is a capacitor plate. This is something that Nikola Tesla was talking about ages ago. But the Earth is a capacitor plate. It holds a static electric charge, and static electric charge is always an attractant charge, sort of like a magnetic charge. However, static electric charge is always attractant, and you have electric potential in proportion with altitude, which I believe is 100 volts per meter. And that is exactly the nudge that you need for gravity, or that nudge for density and buoyancy to allow for denser objects to find their way down and less dense objects to find their way up. So, the point is we do have scientific, rational explanations for lots of things in the flat Earth model. However, the best of us, or, the most honest of us, refuse to speculate. For example, I refuse to say that there's a dome in the sky. There may be. I don't think that there is. I haven't seen evidence for it, but I'll leave that possibility open. Now, we are certainly allowed to speculate or theorize, but when we're talking about debates, flat versus sphere, we don't want to get into too much speculation. We want to stick to basics. And again, curvature and axial rotation are two very basic ones that, based on some of the arguments that I've seen you make, you're really basing this on how light is reaching your eye, especially over like 50 or 60 miles away, which technically should be impossible on a sphere. But we'll get into your video. I'll stop with my little rant here. But, how dare you call the truth a distraction from the truth? I mean, that's so ridiculous. Your ignorance of this topic is a distraction of the truth, and you are spreading your ignorance and getting in the way of the truth by spreading your ignorance. And you need to really look into this a little bit more deeply before you go spouting off at the mouth and calling people liars and disingenuous psychological operation.
Jeranism last night defended why he thought the flat earth was relevant. From my perspective, the conversation, it just reinforced what I already knew. It seems to me that the flat earth believers cannot be reached because they make the choice to ignore reality.
Wow, that is the most redonkulous thing I have ever heard in my entire life. You're essentially claiming that flat earthers are denying the truth, denying what's plain and obvious and right in front of them. Yet, the exact opposite is true. We're all very familiar with the heliocentric logic and the so-called proofs therein. We were all raised in the same educational system as you. It's not like we just, climbed out from under some rock or fell off some turnip truck from 400 years ago, right? We've actually gone ahead and questioned the fundamental pillars or the fundamental premises involved with everything starting, again with the Big Bang, going through to heliocentrism and the idea of inanimate soup forming life out of sheer chance. All of that is theoretical folly that's taught as scientific fact when there is no evidence for any of it. It is mere theory. And when you find out that entities like NASA are lying, taking our money to fool us into believing in the preposterous and absurd theoretical fantasies of theoretical physicists. And so this is a huge deception that is right under your nose that you refuse to look at. Again, I don't ask you to be a flat earther. I just simply ask you to scrutinize the heliocentric model properly. Now, again, you believe that you live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere in outer space in a vacuum, flying around the sun at over 66,000 miles an hour, while the sun flies around the galaxy at 500,000 miles an hour. Now, you may not know this, but the Earth's plane of orbit, or the ecliptic, is alleged to be offset to the path of the sun by 60 degrees. So this causes some, or brings up some pretty, serious questions about heliocentrism when you realize this, and how gravity is supposedly an inward pulling in all directions around a center of mass, being the sun in this example, while the Earth somehow maintains a 60-degree plane of orbit around the sun as the sun travels around the galaxy. This really doesn't make sense in a gravitic sense, and in fact, none of the heliocentric model makes any sense. The only reason that you deem it possible that you live stuck to the side of this theoretical spinning sphere is due to the theory of gravity, first postulated and described by Newton, and then sort of cemented into the scientific record by the boy band of science, Einstein, who again was nothing more than sort of a propped up and backed by certain interests. Won't get into that, but certain interests backed Einstein as sort of a superhuman, super smart genius, while in fact, people that knew him claimed that he was not a genius. He dropped out of high school, beat his wife, was and even admitted towards the end of his life that most of his theories were probably wrong and will be disproved. And again, when you realize that the Earth is a stationary plane, gravity isn't necessary, the Big Bang Theory goes right out the window, and you do sort of, if you want to stay true to the scientific method and call yourself a scientifically minded person, then you really have to revisit the heliocentric model as a rational adult, as opposed to the last time you did it, which was when you were a toddler, and any logical arguments you may have mustered against the globe Earth, like, well, why don't we fall off the side, or what makes it spin, or why do we have perfect cycles if we're allegedly moving and spinning and our axis wobbles, and how does the North Pole star remain fixed above the axis if the axis is supposedly traversing through space due to axial precession, or 1 degree every 72 years, which is impossible. How is it possible that we can see any of the same stars or constellations from season to season in a heliocentric model? Why don't we only see the waning to no moon to waxing crescent phases of the moon during the day, exclusively in the day? Why don't we only see full moons at night and exclusively at night? None of these basic observations are compatible with the heliocentric model. I mean, there's literally just this endless pile of evidence that proves the heliocentric model does not work. A couple of them I just rapid fired through, but you really have to research this, and you really have to reconsider some of these assumptions that we were reared to believe as young as possible. And frankly, when you do revisit the spinning spherical Earth in outer space governed by gravity, the theory of gravity is quite absurd and preposterous, while the flat Earth model, while, it still is in sort of its infancy, we are also withheld a lot of information. I believe a big key piece of information that we're missing is the entirety of Antarctica, which is, for all intents and purposes, off limits to the general public. You can take guided tours to specific areas which are south of the southern Horn of Africa, south of either New Zealand or Australia, and south of South America. Those are the three main ways you get to Antarctica, and they are all separate little areas where you cannot connect, you cannot travel between the areas, so you're cordoned off. And other than that, Globers claim that it's impossible, if you're looking at an azimuthal equidistant sort of projection, it would be impossible to govern that much area, when in fact they only have to govern those three key areas I just mentioned, those southernmost areas, because it is a big world, and you don't want to start, you want to start as close as possible to your destination, and according to the original Mercator projections and older maps, the southern tip of South America essentially butts right up to at least some of the glaciers of the Antarctic. So, at any rate, the point to all of this is for you to claim that flat earthers are denying evidence that's right in front of them is preposterous, because we have actually taken the time to study both models. In most cases, I'm willing to bet you that an average flat earther knows more about the heliocentric model than an average glober. Plus, an average flat earther knows an infinitely more about the flat earth model than your average globe earther. So this is one of those situations where if you continue to just fight this and ignore the evidence, then you're not adding anything to the conversation, and it makes a person wonder why you continue to participate in the conversation unless you're just deciding to argue for argument's sake.
Last night, multiple times, Jeranism and his wife said that there's no proof of curvature on the earth. And I reminded them that I had just uploaded the latest video that shows with complete evidence that there is curvature of the earth. It is documentable, it is observable, it is provable. To say that there isn't curvature is to deny reality. I also brought up to Jeranism last night, and he said he'll make a video debunking this. Opposite poles, opposite hemispheres of the spherical Earth. The stars rotate in opposite directions. And this is very strong evidence that the Earth is a sphere, because you cannot have stars rotating in opposite directions, in opposite hemispheres on a flat Earth.
Wow, is that really what you're going to start arguing, is the apparent opposite rotation of the stars in either hemisphere? Now, first of all, I would argue that if the evidence for curvature is lacking, and in fact all the evidence shows the Earth to be a plane, and the evidence for axial rotation and orbital motion is lacking, as well as the entire concept of orbital mechanics being physically impossible, given the chaotic gravitic nature of the model itself. With all that being said, what exactly does that have to do with the shape of the Earth? I mean, it's as if you know what the stars are and what the stars are doing. You're assuming that it's the Earth spinning that's causing the apparent motion of the stars, when there is no evidence for this, and in fact there is evidence to the contrary, if you care to look. Throughout history, mainstream, well-funded scientists have been trying to prove that the Earth is spinning using a variety of experiments using specifically light. One of the most famous is Airy's failure. The reason they called it a failure is because Airy wanted to prove that the Earth was spinning, and it was the starlight coming towards our eye or towards our telescope that was essentially coming in more or less perfectly straight stationary waves. But what in fact Airy's experiments found was that it is the Earth that is stationary, and it is the starlight or the ether or whatever medium is carrying the starlight that is spinning. There are simple physical experiments you can do to prove that the Earth isn't spinning.
Oh, I see that one. I thought that was coming straight down. A little over this way. Oh! That was awesome.
The fact that you think that you have some sort of proof of a ball Earth or exclusive proof of a ball Earth because of this apparent opposing rotation of the southern stars is it's circumstantial evidence. Honestly, it truly is irrelevant, And knowing that the Earth is a stationary plane, there must be a rational. And now, one thing that I have theorized a lot. Well, a lot of this isn't theory. This is theory based on fact. So it's sort of educated guesses, which is really all we can do right now, short of physical experiments. But some things are sort of hard to do physical experiments with when you're talking about, say, an electromagnetic vortex that spans the entire flat Earth. I'm not claiming that the flat Earth is a disk in outer space. However, the known realm that we, dwell in, that is ostensibly or allegedly encompassed 360 degrees around by what's known as the Antarctic. The world itself generates an electromagnetic field, a magnetic vortex coming from the center and emanating south, in all directions from the center, where the central north is sort of like the positive pole of a disk magnet, while all edges around the outside or the south are the negative pole of such a disk magnet. Now, whatever's causing this magnetism, that's a mystery, but it's not even argued by mainstream science that the Earth, whatever shape it is, emits an electromagnetic field. So that's not argued. The point being, however, knowing what we know about cosmology that you are clueless about. No offense, you just haven't looked at this alternate cosmology that happens to match reality better than the heliocentric infinite space cosmology. But knowing what we know about this new way of looking at the stars, first of all, the heliocentric globe Earth team has absolutely no clue what stars are, even if they postulate things like hot atomic fusion and millions of light years away. That's pseudoscience. It's theoretical. It can never be proven in a million years. Therefore, it technically can't be 100% falsified, and so it is not science. It is pseudoscience. All of that theory, when you realize that there's an alternate model of the stars, then you realize that light definitely is playing tricks on our eyes for a number of reasons. Light is a specific frequency of wavelengths of electromagnetic waves, and so if you understand, or when you understand, that the Earth, regardless of the shape, but the Earth generates an electromagnetic field that is a vortex and sort of looks like a upside down bundt cake, if you will. The light waves, these electromagnetic waves coming from the sun and coming from the stars and coming from the moon, are passing through these natural conduits for electromagnetic waves, which are generated by the Earth, which you can call them electromagnetic flux lines or magnetic flux lines. And these are also sort of matched by the recently discovered ionized plasma tubes in the lower magnetosphere, so about 600 kilometers up, about 300 to 400 miles up or so. You have these meridianally running, so north to south running plasma tubes in the lower magnetosphere that seem to jive with, or seem to be related to, the natural electromagnetic field of the Earth. And so when you understand that the light coming from the stars, which are absolutely not light year distant suns, we have some theories as to what the stars are, but that's sort of irrelevant. Whatever the source light of the stars and the sun is, it's being heavily distorted and passed through natural conduits generated by the Earth that heavily affect our little tiny viewpoint of the stars.
No stars. Okay, so that was the first tip off, and so then
You can see the Earth.
you can see light reflected off of objects. Okay, as we look in this space, we say this place is filled with light. We do not see any lines of light between us. We only see what is illuminated by the light, what the light reflects off of.
Yeah.
We do not see the light itself. There, you see that laser beam?
Right.
No, you don't see the laser beam. You see the laser beam? No, it's because it's off. Boy,
Right every time.
That worked every time, man. Okay, you can see where the. Okay, between you and me. No, it's not there. You cannot see light. Okay, it's really important to understand this.
Sometimes you can see it. Oh, that's right. You see the dust.
You see the dust particles, right? You see only what light reflects off of. So when you actually look at a source in outer space, it is not transmitted. Light is not transmitted in the visible spectrum in outer space. Period.
So then, how would the Hubble telescope take
It will blind you, but you can't see it.
So Hubble
They do need those damn
So basically,
gold reflectors. But you can look straight at the sun, not see anything, and you're blind. It is not visible.
in other words, telescope has to have some kind of lens where light
It needs
reflects off.
a diffraction lens. Okay, what really sealed the deal for Tom Brown in his research is he found one of those coffee table 18 by 24 coffee table things that cost $500. It had 400 pages in it, 5,000 photographs of the sun. It was shown in every spectrum, gamma rays and infrared, and X-rays, you name it. There were in that book, put out by NASA as like the definitive study of the sun. There was not one single photograph in the book of the sun in the visible spectrum. None.
It was taken from outer space.
Taken from outer space. Right. What you see is the refraction of the sun in the upper atmosphere. That's all you see. That is not what it looks like. And the minute you get out of the atmosphere, you got no reflection between you and it. You can't see it.
So
Not there.
if you took if you went in outer space and took a pinhole camera with just raw photographic film on the back,
Something that
no lens in between to diffract with, you're not going to get an image of light.
you may get an image in the infrared or something else. There is no.
Okay.
There's nothing in the visible spectrum. The visible spectrum effect of the sun is created by the upper atmosphere.
Right.
So the Earth is reflecting off the atmosphere.
No, the radiation from the sun. I mean, but the thing is, what you see is, you see a yellow orb in a blue background because the upper atmosphere actually diffracts
Right.
the light into those two spectrums.
Right.
You don't just see orange against black.
mean, the
You don't just see blues. You always see the yellow and blue.
So if I understand it correctly, if I took the pinhole camera and pointed it at the sun, I will get no image. But if I pointed it at the moon or the Earth, I would get an image because it's reflecting off.
You see the objects
and the
that the
earth.
light reflects off.
But the sun, I would get no image unless I was in a different
Because you were
spectrum.
pointing it right at the source of light. Because you can't, because light is not visible.
Right.
You cannot see the light. We have been lied to in such a wholesale manner about almost the nature of everything
Oh yeah.
that it's
You can't see the stars or anything.
no. Those are all
Sources.
created. Those are all the stars you see are created. The vision of them is created by the upper atmosphere.
So the reason that the space shuttle, they have that window and they have atmosphere inside the shuttle, that's why when they look outside the
No, they created diffraction gratings in the windows so you could see them. Because the early ones didn't. That was the other thing. Is Tom Brown called some of the old astronauts and asked them. They said no. Yeah.
When you understand how electromagnetic vortices work, for one thing, the central part of this electromagnetic vortex, and this is proven science, this isn't theory, the central part of the vortex, if it's spinning clockwise, then the exterior part of the vortex is spinning in the opposite direction or counterclockwise, and vice versa. That's just how electromagnetic or magnetic vortices operate. So you do have that, and that could be one instance of why we see the phenomenon of the southern stars. Again, an explanation for this is sort of irrelevant because nobody has a clue what the stars actually are or what's going on up there. A lot of further study needs to be done on the stars, and certainly not by NASA. Now, the other thing that you have to consider is the atmosphere itself behaves as sort of a subjective large convex lens around each and every one of us, and so we all see the night sky slightly differently depending on our location, altitude, atmospheric conditions, etc., etc. And so the our view towards the heavens, our view towards the sun is subjective, and you're looking at a subjective instance or a single rendering of all of these different lights coming towards you, the observer. However, that's going to be a totally different experience for someone 200 miles west of you or south of you or whatever the case. And it is these few things, again, the electromagnetic field of the Earth, as well as the essentially large convex lens that follows you around wherever you go, that heavily influence, both of these factors heavily influence how light travels through space and different layers of density atmosphere and electromagnetic fields and ionized plasma tubes to eventually reach your eye. There's lots of room for all sorts of bizarre things that we're not aware of. And for you to say that counter-rotation of southern stars is exclusive to a sphere, then you're, absolutely experiencing confirmation bias, and you believe that every observation is exclusive to a sphere because you believe that no matter what, the Earth is a spinning sphere. I could show you proof, which I've actually shown several bits of proof throughout this video. The Earth isn't a spinning sphere, yet no matter what, you will continue believing that the Earth is indeed a spinning sphere. Now, another big part of this is the fact that when you focus from anywhere in the northern hemisphere, even from the equator, when you focus on the North Pole star Polaris, you will see a perfect ring, in terms of a time-lapse view, a perfect ring around Polaris, and Polaris remains essentially fixed in one single spot. It does make a tiny little ring, but if you focus your telescope on it, you can leave your telescope right there and it'll stay fixed on Polaris. Now, this is a really key debunking point of the heliocentric model for so many ways, but we'll leave that alone for right now. If you look at a time lapse long exposure or a time lapse of focusing on Polaris, you'll always see this tunnel pattern. However, if you look at the Southern Cross area or the South Polar axis, not only is there not a South Pole star, but there is also no single point that behaves as the North Star does in the South. There's no single point that you can point to in space that remains central to all the other stars.
For all those who think that the southern stars are a proof of the globe, I want to show you something. And this can be found in most of the videos that I've seen about it. And also, I've talked before about the fact that a lot of people are coming and saying you can't have Australia and South Africa and South America all looking in opposite directions, but all seeing the stationary southern pole star and the stars rotating around it. And then the declination, when I looked into that and saw how really they're not all looking south, they're all looking in a different direction. So the next thing was, well, is that middle star stationary? So this is from the Very Large Telescope that's down in South America somewhere.
That sounds so official. Very Large Telescope.
Yeah, really. And one thing that you'll notice, so we're going to watch these stars here in a second, and I'll show you. And it's about right here. Okay, so when we look here at these southern stars, and I don't know how good this video feed is, but you will notice here that, and I'm going to keep rewinding this just to show you, that these stars are not stationary. Okay, so the middle star, Cygnus Octantis or whatever, is going to be actually moving left to right. There is no stationary point in the sky here. It slowly, and I repeat, slowly moves left to right. So it's very slow. It's very hard to see. So for John LeBon and people like that are convinced that this southern star is a stationary point in the sky.
Which it must be if the heliocentric model is correct, and since we do see Polaris behaving like that, then the South Polar Star must also be like that. As ridiculous as the North Pole, remaining fixed above the axis is, we should see that on the South Pole.
Correct. And if we don't, then there's something else going on. Either those stars are moving across, the outer edge, or something else is happening. But if you notice here, and I'll try and put my mouse there, that where that spot is moving to the right. Ever so slowly. If you try and find the spot that you think it's rotating around and you leave your mouse there, it disappears.
Even documented in zetetic astronomy way back in the 1860s that the South Polar stars behave differently than the North Pole star. So what this means is although you claim that flat Earth doesn't have an explanation for the alleged identical South Polar axis of stars similar to the one found in the north being Polaris, that's a myth. It's a wives' tale, and any photographic evidence you can find of the so-called South Polar axis stars are forgeries, and if you actually observe the far south observatories, you don't see the same pattern that you do in the north, even viewed from the equator and even further south than the equator. So what this means is you don't have this bilateral symmetry that would be 100% necessary in the heliocentric model in terms of the North Pole and the South Pole. And it's not just because of the lack of a central South Polar axis in terms of stars or a spot in space central to all the other stars. There are tons of differences between the North Pole and the South Pole. They're not even remotely similar. The South Pole is a huge, vast, massive permafrost, permanent glaciers that are miles deep and hundreds of feet tall above the sea level. There's no indigenous life that lives in the South Pole except for penguins, while in the North Pole it's essentially teeming with all sorts of life, polar bears, just all sorts of stuff. The far southern latitudes are far colder by record and on average. The water changes its pH balance the further south you get. Barometric pressure continues to decrease the further south you get. So there's, the Antarctic is really a big mystery. And I mean, it's fairly obvious once you realize this that is why they set up the Antarctic Treaty back in the 1950s, right after U.S. Admiral Richard Byrd came back and reported that there was all sorts of great stuff that we could live off of for centuries. You'd think that the governments of the world would use that as a resource, but instead they made it off limits to corporations, and most people cordoned it off because obviously they're hiding something. And it's Antarctica, although it is sort of talked about in science fiction as alien bases and the entrance to the center of the earth and all this crazy stuff, this crazy wild conspiracy theory about Antarctica. Now, the Nazis were very interested in it, as well as the Americans and the Russian governments were very interested in Antarctica during and after World War I, during the Cold War, during the space race. And so what it appears to me is that the space race was a way to funnel money into a program that was on the surface space exploration, but in fact most likely was military domination and military manipulation of the Antarctic, or the southernmost regions. And the little bases that we have that are convenient to those three locations are just a small fraction of the actual Antarctic. Now, we will get into some of the perceived issues with the azimuthal equidistant projection that I know that you have, because I have heard you mention, you have issues with that projection, but they are perceived problems because you obviously don't understand what the azimuthal equidistant projection represents and how it works. It's got similar problems to the Mercator projection. And it's also got similar problems to the globe. But we'll get into all that in just a little bit. I just really wanted to point out that the lights that you can see in the night sky are in no way whatsoever proof of either axial rotation or Earth curvature. And in fact, the lights in the night sky have proven throughout history, documented scientific history by mainstream, educated scientists, including Airy and his famous Airy's failure. And then you've got the Michelson-Morley, Michelson-Gale, and Sagnac experiments proving conclusively that the Earth is stationary.
Oh, I see that one. I thought that was coming straight down. No, a little over this way. Oh. That was awesome.
Do basic physical experiments to prove the Earth is stationary. And so whatever the stars are doing in the northern and southern hemispheres, there could be lots of explanations. I mean, the atmosphere itself, or the atmosphere plane, behaves as a giant lens, and you've got this electromagnetic vortex, which electromagnetic fields can bend and distort and change light waves in all sorts of ways that you're probably not aware of, and many people, and including myself, probably don't fully understand. But just to assume that because you can see southern rotation of stars in the southern axis, which is absolutely nothing like what you see in the north, by the way, is not proof of anything other than we need to study the stars further. But it still doesn't prove curvature or axial rotation, especially considering you cannot find a central point in the south similar to that of Polaris. And I don't mean even a star. There should be a point. If there's not a star there, there should be a single point that you can focus on that remains fixed above that south polar axis. And that should be visible anywhere south of the equator, just as it is in the north. And you can't find such things. So, you have nothing there. I mean, it's a non-argument. There's nothing to argue there. I'm going to roll a quick clip that Jaron excerpted from their debate that they had Monday the 23rd, because it really, just this one, it's a short clip, encapsulates just the utter ignorance of your typical globe earther, where it's so frustrating from this side of the argument because you literally have to teach your opponent in this debate about their own model. You have to coach them on attacking your model properly. You have to coach them on defending their own model properly. And so it isn't even a debate. It's more like trying to teach an unruly, bratty child simple arithmetic while they plug their ears and close their eyes and scream la 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 la. I mean, that's really about the size of a typical flat earth globe earth debate. And so let's roll this quick clip from Jaronism's excerpt from it. And I may butt in this a little bit because, I mean, this really, this sort of behavior from globe earthers and just pulling bullshit out of thin air and claiming it to be scientific fact is just so typical. And yet, because we're crazy flat earthers, then anything that you think you can come up with that defends the globe model must be true. I mean, I don't know where people like this get off, but let's just roll the clip.
The North Star proves the Earth is a sphere.
That is the single most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. The North Star proves the Earth is a sphere. What the hell are you talking about? Now, I know that you go on to claim some more ridiculous things, but let's just think about this for a minute. And you even admit later on here in a minute that the North Star has been above the North Polar axis for all of recorded history, hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of years. Now, what you don't seem to understand is that single fact disproves the heliocentric model, and it certainly doesn't prove curvature of the Earth, so you're just way the hell out in left field here. But what my point is when you look at the phenomenon of the so-called precession of the equinoxes, which is allegedly caused by the axial precession of the Earth over time, over 26,000 years, you'll realize that if you consider the North Polar axis as a pointer pointing at the very distant North Pole star Polaris, it is very distant, although it is not the most distant star, but it is very distant. That pointer, that alignment, imagine, if you've ever used a sniper rifle, zeroing in on a target that's a mile away. if you don't have your alignment perfect, you're not going to be able to zero in on it. You have to be aligned perfectly. If you were to misalign from that target from a mile away by even a fraction of a degree, you're going to be way off. Now, when you think of Polaris as being pointed at by our North Polar axis, and the fact that the North Polar axis is allegedly going through this 26,000 year wobble, which is allegedly causal of the precession of the equinoxes, then you would know that the axis, the North Polar axis, as well as the South Polar axis, but we're just talking about the North because it points directly at Polaris, which is a unique phenomenon in all of the Earth. But however, that pointer, that axis, should be going through this wobble, this precession, at 1 degree every 72 years. So what that means is that we should see throughout history a series of new North Stars. And as a matter of fact, the more distant you place the star, the worse the problem becomes. Because again, I'm not sure if you realize this, but even a small divergence in angle, if you extend that divergent line from a baseline, say it's a half a degree over a mile or a million miles, then you've got a huge, massive divergence. It's the same concept with a sniper rifle. If you've got a mile distant target and you're misaligned by a fraction of a degree, you're going to miss that target by a mile, so to speak. Not literally. But the same thing goes for the very distant North Pole star Polaris. The fact that it has remained above the so-called North Polar axis for all of recorded history debunks the heliocentric model, because the so-called precession of the equinoxes is dependent on that axis wobbling over 26,000 years. And although that may seem like a long time, astronomers meticulously studying the heavens for a few thousand years would have certainly noticed the North Pole star changing many, many, many times throughout history. And we'd notice it even in, maybe a couple of lifetimes. Because if that thing moves 2 degrees over 140 years, then technically we should have a new North Star every 50 to 100 years at the most. And the fact that the North Pole star Polaris has remained fixed just as it always does, throughout recorded history, completely disagrees with and demolishes the heliocentric model. And the fact that you claim so boldly and just ignorantly that the North Pole star proves the Earth is a globe is like saying, bananas prove the Earth is a banana, or the North Pole star Polaris proves that leprechauns bury their treasures at the end of rainbows. I mean, there is no chain of logic to your claim. You seem to think that all observations are exclusive to a sphere, even when the observations couldn't possibly occur on a sphere with the given proportions and behaviors as the Earth. One huge example would be what goes up must come down.
What is gravity?
I have no idea. Okay, next question.
And by the way, this is called gravity.
I gotta say, you're totally blowing my mind right now.
That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
Globe Earthers, for some reason, seem to think that the fact that what goes up must come down somehow proves that they live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere, when in fact, what goes up must come down is 100% compatible with the flat stationary Earth. This is the level of just complete bias and incapability of the masses to think outside of the box, to the point to where you take an observation such as what goes up must come down, which is a physical impossibility if you are somehow stuck to the side of a spinning sphere, yet there is all of this wild theory, ultimately coming from Einstein, who replaced Newton, who merely described gravity mathematically. Einstein came up with a theory to explain gravity, but he doesn't really explain it. He just comes up with big, long equations and explanations that were actually thought of by others prior to him. He merely took credit for many of his ideas in terms of general relativity and certain equations that he's famous for. But for some reason, people point to Einstein's theories as laws of physics, which is totally ridiculous. However, that's what we're stuck with. An observation that is incompatible with a spinning sphere, what goes up must come down, is patched over by theory that makes absolutely no sense. The theory essentially goes, the mass of the spherical Earth warps the natural rectilinear state of space-time, which is a vacuum. It is nothing. So the mass of the Earth warps nothing, space-time, and space and time, a vacuum, somehow sort of, it's bad language to say the word push, but it is essentially an acceleration of objects and mass towards the center of the Earth, towards the center of gravity. Which, again, if you think about this, it's just preposterous. How can a vacuum push against anything with any force, let alone enough force to hold the oceans at the equator, which are allegedly spinning over 1,000 miles an hour? You're talking about millions and billions and tons of water being stuck to the side of this spinning sphere at the equator, and yet a dragonfly can hover right there, and gravity is so weak it doesn't affect it. Okay, so what I'm going to do real quick is go through a quick rundown of the fundamental natural forces that are described and purported by physics, because I think this is a lesson that every globber needs to really think about and consider, especially considering the force of gravity. So the fundamental forces are the strong force, the electromagnetic force, the weak force, and gravity. And you can call the strong and weak, the strong nuclear and weak nuclear. You can read more into these, but just sort of looking at the basics of it, and there are more in-depth analyses of each, the weak force, and then more diagrams of the weak force. It looks like they don't go too much into gravity, into extra explanations, so we'll just stick with this primary one here. So as you can see, the strong nuclear force holds nucleuses together, and there's a misspelling here, so wow, because the last one of these I checked, the strength of gravity they had as 10 to the 0 power. This one has gravity as 6 times 10 to the negative 39. So maybe I'll check another source as well. But okay, so the strong nuclear force, this article, and I'll put a link in the description. It's hyperphysics.phy-astra. But I will put a link in the description. So the strong nuclear force holds nuclei or nucleus together, with the misspelled together, so I'm really questioning this. The strength is 1. The range in m, the small m, would that be meters, is 10 to the negative 15th power. Diameter of a medium-sized nucleus. Now, this is something, you know, when you get into negative numbers, especially negative exponents, especially extremely large negative exponents, 10 to the negative 15th, it starts to get a little confusing, because how can you define something as less than 0? I mean, sure, you can theoretically make the numbers work to have something, balancing a checkbook, for example. You can have less than no money in theory, but technically, like in a square, or you say a cubic meter, or whatever the area is, you can have 0 particles in that cubic meter, just as an example, but you can't have less than 0 particles in that cubic meter. Does that make sense? So to say that the range of the strong nuclear force is 10 to the negative 15th power in meters, let me just bust out my calculator here. Well, if you look it up on this Google Calc, it's 1e minus 15. This is 10 times negative 10.
4 times negative 10, 5 times negative 10, 6 times negative 10, 7 times negative 10, 8 times negative 10, 9 times negative 10, 10, negative 10, 11 times negative 10, 12 times negative 10, 13 times negative 10, 14 times negative 10, 15 equals, yeah.
Okay, so I multiplied by 10 one too many times, but hey. Negative 1e plus 15, so yeah, this this number, these numbers that they give you for the fundamental forces are just really ridiculous, because I would submit, for one reason, they talk about the forces that hold nucleus of atoms together. Atoms are indeed theoretical items. They've never been imaged. They've never been captured in any sort of rendering. It is merely theoretical. The numbers work. Science, or lions, or theoretical sciences on the micro levels now, we're talking about micro-theoretical sciences, have really sort of gone off the deep end in many ways that the macro or astro theoretical physicists have gone, in terms of coming up with theories, assigning numerical values to their observations, and squeeze those observations and numerical values to fit their theories. And as long as the numbers work, then they claim that that's proof enough that the theory works. So I just do have trouble. I mean, I understand the concept of negative numbers, but how can something have a range, which is a vicinity of something less than 0? How many ways can you divide 0? Now, I understand that you can divide the number 1 essentially an infinite number of times, right? Because if you cut 1 in half, then you get a half. And if you cut a half in half, you get a quarter. And if you get a quarter in half, you get 0.125, which is an eighth. If you cut a eighth in half, then you get a 16th, which is 0.0625, and so on and so forth. So you can keep splitting numbers as long as you start with something down into smaller areas. However, to say that something has a range smaller than 0, because again, 10 times 0 would be 0. 10 times negative 10 would be 100 less than 0, right? So if it was your balance sheet on your checkbook, you'd have to raise $100 to be broke. But that sort of thing doesn't work in reality. That only works in numbers. You can't have less than 0. So then you've got the electromagnetic force, which we all know, and really electromagnetism is, I mean, we can manipulate it, we understand how to generate it and benefit from it, but at the end of the day, it really is still sort of a mystery. Again, even brilliant minds like Tesla understood things that most modern electrical engineers appear to overlook. That you don't even necessarily need to generate electricity by spinning magnets around coils or coils around magnets one way or another. The Earth itself generates or has infinite electric potential. But we are familiar with the electromagnetic force. They say that the strength is 1/137. The range in meters is infinite in terms of electromagnetic waves, I reckon. And particle is a photon, mass of 0, and a spin of 1. I've really got to look at another chart because this just seems too odd. Now, even as a child, I remember thinking that photons were sort of an odd thing. This idea that there are actually little particles hitting my eye from the sun when you look at the sun never set well with me. For some reason, it just doesn't make sense whatsoever that particles are riding through waves of nothing through space, because again, according to the heliocentric model, sunlight has to travel 90 some odd million miles through a vacuum to hit your eye, and we're expected to believe that a particle called a photon has traveled 90 million miles in about 8 minutes to reach your eye. This is ridiculous. And light waves are a spectrum of the electromagnetic. They're a sort of electromagnetic waves, just like radio frequency waves are a frequency of electromagnetic waves. And honestly, I believe that pretty much all forms of energy will eventually one day be found to be all different spectrums of the, for lack of a better term, different spectrums of waves, whether it's a solid state item or whether it's a wave of light. I don't think there are particles in light. I mean, I don't agree with that. I'm sorry. That's like saying that there are particles, of Wi-Fi, right? And anybody that knows anything about wireless modems and such knows that you're simply sending data through waves, but you're not actually sending particles. It isn't anything physical that's being carried through that medium, through that wave. And I don't think that light, does either. I think that light may be more along the lines of information, or just merely a spectrum of the vast electromagnetic spectrum that we can see. I think that sound waves and those sorts of waves are eventually going to be shown to be sort of unified with the other, all the other sorts of waves. And just to give you an example, let's just use something simple like colors. You've got lots of different colors. You've got blue, red, green, and yellow, and they're all very different. But to say that they're not all colors would be ridiculous, right? Of course they're all colors. But I feel like that's sort of what's going on when we're talking about these forces here: the strong nuclear, electromagnetic, the weak nuclear, which, by the way, I don't agree with anything nuclear. I think that is all theoretical. And although, again, the numbers work in terms of atomic bonds and valence electrons, they've got the math worked out. And so we believe everything that they purport hook, line, and sinker, although an atom or an electron or smaller particles have never been imaged or conclusively proven. They are still indeed in the realm of theory. But again, if the numbers work, there's no sense in them changing their minds, yet they still are always on the lookout for things like the Higgs boson particle, the God particle, dumping billions of dollars into programs like LIGO and the Large Hadron Collider, and of course NASA. Now down here at the bottom, this is the one that I wanted to look out here. Here is the gravity, which they say the strength is 6 times 10 to the 39th. And I know for a fact that I pulled up a chart pretty much like this within a month ago, and they claimed that the strength of gravity was 10 to the 0 power. Now, 6 times 10 to the negative 39th is even worse than 10 to the 0 power. 10 to the 0 power is just 0. The strength of something, I just don't understand how something, you can register strength as a negative number, furthermore a very large negative exponent, and I'm not even going to try to describe. 10 to the negative 39th is 10 with 39 zeros following it in the negative. So any sort of negative number, I'm sorry, but that cannot describe any sort of strength. That's exactly like saying that a vacuum can push against, the atmosphere with some strength. And if you describe that strength, this is just an example, as 10 to the negative 10th power or whatever, then that still doesn't get it. Negative numbers are placeholders. You can't actually derive or physically demonstrate a negative of anything. Of course, if you have 5 apples and take away 2, you've subtracted. But what I'm saying is if you have 3 apples and take away 5, you don't actually have negative 2 apples. That's a placeholder. And so for science to claim that the strength of gravity waves is either 10 to the 0 power, which would be 0, or 6 times 10 to the negative 39 power, which, I'm sorry, that would be 60 with 39 zeros after it. So that's how weak it is. It's so weak that it's weaker than 0. Yet the range is infinite. Right. And this is what you believe in. This is what you claim to believe in. This is what you claim to understand as well. And I've always known growing up, I was always very interested in the sciences, that the gravitational force was alleged to be the weakest of the natural forces because it sort of has to be, but then again, it sort of has to be extremely strong as well. Again, gravity is what they claim binds moons to planets, planets to stars, stars to galaxies, etc., etc. They claim that it's what formed stars. I mean, gravity is essentially the driving, according to heliocentrism, is the driving constructive force. Although chaotic, random, godless, and meaningless, gravity is allegedly the controlling and creative force in the universe, and yet it is a mere theory postulated by a dead shill named Albert Einstein. For some reason, people point to his bizarre theories as proof of things, when in fact his bizarre theories were just yet another in a long line of bizarre theories of contemporaneous and even theoretical physicists prior to Einstein who came up with ideas such as general relativity, and I believe even the famous equation E equals mc squared. But the whole point to this is you believe gravity causes what goes up to come down. You believe this is exclusive proof of a spinning sphere, and I'm here to tell you that you are 100% wrong in your premise. The only reason you would technically, theoretically even need gravity is if you do live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere. So if you take away that assumption and realize that the Earth is indeed a static plane without orbital motion, without axial rotation, without the necessary inverse square curvature to result in an overall sphere, then gravity is not necessary. And again, the simple laws of density and buoyancy allow for what goes up must come down, and again, the static electric charge of the Earth allows for the nudge for denser or higher density objects to tend downward. And it is that simple. And, mind you, the grandfather of theoretical physics, or the grandfather of gravity, Isaac Newton, would have had zero understanding of electromagnetism. And so Neither would he have had any understanding of manned flight. Neither would he have had understanding of video, high altitude weather balloons, instant communication, computer assistance for long algorithms and mathematical problems that might take a genius like Newton a month to complete. A computer can do it in an instant. So, you know, this day and age are far better equipped to prove things one way or another than Newton, certainly, or even Einstein was equipped. And, you know, people really do worship Einstein as if he's some sort of god on earth. And they often credit him with the, sort of indirectly credit him with the invention of the nuclear bomb, using the equation E equals mc squared. However, again, since atoms are theoretical and almost certainly do not exist in reality as they claim, then splitting atoms is a theoretical fantasy, and even if such a thing were possible, they never did achieve it. I don't even think they really tried. I think that the whole, whatever it's called, Manhattan Project, I always want to say the Philadelphia experiment, I get the two confused, but the Manhattan Project, where it was this secretive thing where nobody told anyone that they were building nuclear bombs, because what they were actually doing was pretending to R&D or research and develop nuclear bombs, but they were just merely propagandizing people to believe that they had nuclear bombs by detonating tons and thousands of tons of TNT or heavier explosives, and showcasing that to convince the American citizens and possibly the Russians, although I do think that there was some collaboration with the Russians, in fact, but to convince the people at large that they had these nuclear bombs that could decimate entire cities. And now their claims have gotten even more grandiose with, 100 megaton or 1,000 megaton, 1,000 million tons of dynamite TNT. That's what they claim they have now. But in fact, all of this is theoretical folly, just as hot atomic fusion, or what you think stars are made of, is theoretical folly, just as gravity is theoretical folly, just as space-time itself is theoretical folly, just as the spinning sphere Earth is theoretical folly, just as the Big Bang Theory is theoretical folly. All of your infinite space mainstream propagated, Star Wars, Star Trek upbringing has led you down a path of complete and utter deception, and you will ridicule and get extremely angry with people who are really trying to do you a huge favor and get you to look at evidence. Again, I don't try to turn anyone into a flat earther. Now, I will argue points with you because I love being on the right side of an argument. But my goal is merely to get you to honestly, objectively look at the heliocentric model, find the obvious glaring problems with it, rationally scrutinize and compare apples to apples the data in both models, and then decide which seems more plausible. And I guarantee that if you do this honestly, diligently, it might take some time, but this is nothing to be embarrassed of. This is the scientific method. And I can guarantee you that you will, at the end of however long it takes you, whether it's a week or a month or a year, to go through your entire checklist of globe Earth proofs, whether it's the Coriolis effect, whether it's the ships over the horizon, or the opposing rotation of the southern stars, whatever your hang-up is on the globe, the simple fact of the matter is the Earth is easily proven to be a stationary plane, so all of that other stuff has explanations for it, the Coriolis effect included. That's been explained perfectly in the flat Earth model, and there's no need for a rotating spherical Earth. So we'll get back into it, but I did just want to show you, and maybe I won't try to find another diagram, but I promise you couldn't have been more than a month ago that gravity, the strength of gravity was 10 to the 0. But again, once you get to 0, what difference does it make if you have less than 0? I'll tell you, these theoretical physicists sure do have their craniums lodged into their rectums at times, it would seem. Now, gravity is so weak it doesn't affect the dragonfly, yet it is so strong and selective that it allows for our upper atmosphere to exist adjacent to this so-called vacuum of outer space or space-time, which is preposterous. Anyone that knows the first thing about fluid dynamics understands that a vacuum simply cannot exist adjacent to a gaseous atmosphere. And what evidence do you have to support this really bizarre theory that the atmosphere exists adjacent to an infinite vacuum? Well, yet again, you point to Einstein's theory of gravity. And so what proof is there of gravity? Well, there is no proof of gravity. It's all theoretical. Planck and Bicep got in trouble a year or two ago for saying that they found proof of gravity waves, when in fact it was just background radiation, cosmic noise. And more recently, LIGO claims to have found proof of gravity waves, but I just uploaded a video on that. What they found was a signal. The signal was a blip on a chart where, quote, as time went forward, the frequency went up, end quote. And the scientists at LIGO convinced themselves this was evidence of a 1.3 billion year old gravity wave. And what they gave you was not one, but two real computer simulations, which is a definite oxymoron. Either something's real or something's a simulation. LIGO, a group of scientists, and LIGO is some sort of interferometer device. It's the, quote, most precise measuring device ever built. But this group of scientists running LIGO, who just so happen to be very thirsty for grant money, they've convinced themselves, due to a blip on a chart, that they have found proof of gravity waves, as well as black holes, as well as binary black holes, as well as binary black holes merging into a single singularity, double positive, single singularity, but whatever. But all of these, very, very exciting and astounding discoveries by LIGO, because they interpreted a blip on a chart.
We have detected gravitational waves. They were detected by LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. LIGO is the most precise measuring device ever built. Let me start with what we saw. So on September 14th, 2015, Anna recorded a signal, and the signal had a very specific characteristic. The characteristic of, as time went forward, the frequency went up. And now it took us months of careful checking, rechecking, analysis, looking at every piece of data to make sure that what we saw was not something that wasn't a gravitational wave,
but in fact it was a gravitational wave.
And we've convinced ourselves.
That's the case, and we're here to announce that today.
By the way, this is not a Hollywood production that I'm going to show you. It is actually a real computer simulation, a real computer simulation, a real computer simulation, a
a real computer simulation, a real computer simulation, a real computer simulation.
Talk about the gravitational waves. You didn't see any gravitational waves there. What you saw was actually the black holes. Now let me look at this from the gravitational wave perspective. So you're going to be, again, a computer simulation. This is a real simulation. So you're going to be, again, a computer simulation. This is a real simulation. A computer simulation. This is a real simulation. A computer simulation. This is a real simulation. A computer simulation. This is a real simulation.
Let me start with what we saw. So on September 14th, 2015, the two LIGO observatories in Hanford, Washington, and Livingston, Louisiana, recorded a signal nearly at the same time, nearly simultaneously, and the signal had a very specific characteristic. The characteristic of, as time went forward, the frequency went up.
And they made a very convincing CGI rendering of what the gullible scientists at LIGO concocted to lend credence to their very ambitious and flimsy evidence of so-called gravity waves no less than 1.3 billion years ago, ergo 1.3 billion light years away, and yet we can't detect any sort of gravity waves emanating from the galactic center or the sun or the moon. Yeah. Okay. Something categorically cannot be real and a simulation. The two terms are mutually exclusive and opposite. So the scientists at LIGO used a definite oxymoron as demonstration of their theory or interpretation of a blip on a chart that was again, quote, described as time went forward, the frequency went up, end quote. So, with all that being said, gravity is also, well, it's weak and strong at the same time and selective in terms of it can hold a single molecule of very light and disparate gas adjacent to the Kármán line or adjacent to the edge of space. Yet gravity is also so strong that it can connect the moon to the Earth and the sun to the Earth and the sun to the galactic center and the galactic center to the great attractor, allegedly. And what this means to me is the claim that the speed of light waves is the fastest speed in the universe is ridiculous, because the orbit of the sun around the alleged galactic center, for example, is connected to the what is alleged to be a supermassive black hole in the center of the galaxy. This is all heliocentric, preposterous theory, but the sun is connected to the center of the galaxy many millions of miles away by gravity. And gravity, although there is really truly no evidence for it, is somehow propagating and tethering the sun to the galactic center, propagating through a vacuum, nothing, instantaneously over those many millions of, I guess you could say, light years or thousands of light years to the galactic center, however far it is. Gravity is acting instantaneously, and so that is much faster than light speed. Now, the fact that the LIGO scientists are claiming that the 1.3 billion year old light coming from those two black holes that they mentioned, that the gravity waves reached us at the speed of light, really doesn't make any sense, because again, in order for the heliocentric model to work, then gravity waves must perpetuate through space-time instantaneously over great distances. There must be no lag, actually, in the time it takes gravity to reach any distant body that has a gravitic relationship, in fact. So this is a big flaw in the whole heliocentric theory, honestly. But, you know, the main point of this is that it really just perplexes me how globe Earth proponents can completely overlook evidence and just completely maintain a mindset of willful ignorance, refusal to consider alternative hypothesis just for argument's sake, in spite of the mountains of evidence out there. There is some disinformation out there, so you may be one of those people that got caught in the trap of the likes of the Flat Earth Society, which is intended to sort of funnel in people who are, cursory researchers that will stumble upon the Flat Earth Society and find much preposterous argument and red herring argument mixed with, some grains of truth, but ultimately it's misinformation about the flat earth truth in order to steer people away from the truth. Because again, this deception is the cornerstone of all deceptions in the world. I mean, this is the big one. Anyway, we'll continue on.
See, a lot of flat earthers seem to have no knowledge about the North Star. They don't understand that it's way, way further away than all the other stars. That's why it appears to never move in the sky, because it's so distant.
Dumb fuck of the year, Lord. Dumb fuck of the year, Lord.
You have just won the Dumb Fuck of the Year award. You said...
That's why it appears to never move in the sky, because it's so distant.
And that makes you a dumbass, because the further away you place the North Pole star Polaris, the worse it makes the problem of the axis allegedly pointing directly towards it for all of history. Now, supposedly you have a 26,000 year phase called the precession of the equinoxes. Now, the precession of the equinoxes is supposedly caused by this axis of ours, this theoretical axis, moving through space, precessing, sort of like a top, precessing through space 1 degree every 72 years. Now, what this means is that we should see a constantly changing North Star, never having the same North Star for longer than 50 to 100 years, 200 at the most, and yet we've had Polaris for all of recorded history. Wow. Now, again, the Earth supposedly spins, but on that axis that it spins, it supposedly wobbles around once every 26,000 years, which equates to 1 degree over 72 years, which means we should never have a fixed North Star for more than a couple centuries at the very most. So, wow, the level of ignorance on this one is just astonishing.
That's what we're
You're
told.
so off. I hope you know how bad you're completely wrong about that. What do you mean?
How am I completely wrong about that?
Because
That's mathematics.
What do you mean it's mathematics? So the other stars that do circles in the skies has something to do with their distance from the Earth?
Absolutely.
Oh boy. Dude,
I don't understand why that's funny. The North Star's supposed to be way further away than all those other stars.
The star is between 400 and 500 light years away. It's not far at all compared to every other star. The stars are all such equal distances away from the Earth. Not equal, I'm saying they are all so incredibly far that they all act identical. That's why we see star circles, because even though one might be 100 light years and the other one might be 4,000 light years, even though that's a couple 100 trillion miles difference, they do the exact same thing. The reason the North Star stays where it is because it's directly aligned with the axis of the Earth. That's the reason why it stays where it is. Has nothing to do with its distance. It's not even...
According to the model, anyway.
Yeah, according to the model. And this is why I hate explaining the globe.
So I just have to say something.
Yes, thank you, Missa. I totally do the same thing and forget to remind the silly globbers that I'm trying to explain that they are misrepresenting their own model. So I was totally following what Jaren was saying, and I really get stuck on that slippery slope a lot in terms of conversation with globeheads because we always find ourselves in a position where we're having to explain the globber's own model to them properly and explain their own arguments to them properly so that they might attempt to adequately attack our arguments or at least adequately defend their own model with, accepted science. And in most cases, even self-proclaimed, scientific geniuses and whatnot don't understand the absurd allegations involved with the very heliocentric model that they claim to represent and cling to so tenaciously. So it's literally up to us as the flat earth proponents to counsel and to teach and really to kibitz our own opponents, give our opponents tips and sort of help them out in attacking us so that at least we might have a fair debate that both sides of the argument are represented accurately, which is ironic and sort of comical, I'm sorry. But it is often up to, and in most cases up to the flat earther to teach the globe clinger about their very model that they are clinging to, very viciously and tenaciously. So I think a lot of this has to do with our culture, which has allowed for anonymous cowards to carry out sort of narcissistic fantasies by inventing arguments which make no sense whatsoever and are not aligned to anybody's theory, including the pro-heliocentric people's theory. Just absolute nonsense they make up off the top of their head because they think it makes sense, or maybe they think they heard it somewhere, or they just, I don't know where people come up with certain things like that in terms of the distance of Polaris. Yet for some reason this sort of person feels that if they simply ignore what you're telling them or ignore the truth, which does happen to be the case here with Hubbard's claim regarding the distance to Polaris, then honestly there is no sense in trying to debate such a person. Now honestly, we flat earthers will really go out of our way and meet people halfway and really try to help people understand the truth. And I think it's pretty it's a pretty wild misrepresentation a lot of people make, categorizing flat earthers as sort of vicious attackers. We may seem stubborn at times. That's because we've educated ourselves on this very heavily. However, there are some out there, and they may be agent provocateurs who are just instigators, but honestly, most of the instigating I've ever seen is coming from the globe earth side, because globe earthers never argue for curvature or axial rotation or proofs of a spinning sphere Earth. They always argue first against the moral integrity of the flat Earth proponent, then the psychological integrity of the flat earth proponent, and then they avoid the actual arguments and debates by applying simple ignorance. And unfortunately, this is the singular tactic. At some point, we flat earth proponents trying to help people will eventually refuse to cotton to people who refuse to listen and refuse to consider the obvious truth, just for argument's sake, just for shits and giggles. And what they use is this singular tactic to protect their paradigm, to protect their worldview. It is a self-defense mechanism. And again, that secret weapon, that singular tactic that is used ultimately by all of the tenacious, vicious globe earth clingers, is plain old ignorance. Willful, unadulterated, uninhibited, remorseless ignorance, which is celebrated in our culture. If you've never seen the film Idiocracy, don't, but that's essentially where we're at. And this sort of celebration of ignorance allows for the herd mentality of unimaginably deceived people to attack the very ones trying to help them and trying to show them the truth and trying to unveil this really ultimate deception that's been going on for quite a long time. Trying to help people realize this ultimate truth. And really what this truth boils down to at the most fundamental and really profound level is that we collectively are not some cosmic accident which sprang up from a big bang and a pile of inanimate soup which randomly wrote billions of lines of DNA code, complex DNA code, successfully in order to create a self-replicating life form that would eventually evolve, in quotes, into a sentient being. The notion, the science, the mainstream scientific notion that amino acids randomly arrange themselves into specific complex, essentially terabytes and terabytes of code, allowing for essentially biological nanotechnology to build sentient life forms from simple materials, and our ability to question our existence and realize the difference between right and wrong, truth and lies, the ability to paint, a beautiful portrait or just write a song or whatever. I mean, there are all these aspects of consciousness that we take for granted, but where does that come from? Does that come from DNA code, or does that come from within us, or is it merely electrical impulses interpreted by the brain, or is there something more to it? And when you do look at things like DNA code and how complex they are, it is self-evidence of a creator. You simply cannot have billions of lines of complex code that is put together in such a perfect way that you can create self-replicating sentient beings out of simple materials with all of the necessary software to create biological hardware out of simple materials. So again, this is impossible due to chance, and when you come to terms with the fact that the universe is not some infinitude of galaxies and stars due to this theoretical Big Bang 14 billion years ago, then the idea of evolution really goes out the window, and the fact that there are no transitional fossil records in terms of species jumping from one species to another has never been found. And even Darwin himself admitted that within 50 years, if even Darwin admitted himself that within 10 or 20 or 50 years, or eventually, if biologists and geologists didn't find at least one, just by happenstance, or probably many sort of intermediary fossils, proof of evolution, it's never been found. And so even according to the original theorizer of evolution, Charles Darwin, then the theory has sort of been debunked by default because the fossil record evidence is not there to support the hypothesis. And there are other problems with evolution as well. We won't get into all that, but the truth is, our postmodern culture has gotten to the point where reality is being blurred with fantasy, and science fiction is being merged with reality, and not just in simulations, but literally, on the horizon are going to be biological implants, biological upgrades, or possibly genetic upgrades. There are people that are pushing for this sort of thing, and it's been in the writing's been on the wall for this sort of thing a long time in media, movies and video games. It's been the Terminator. I mean, think about them all. Cherry 5000 goes back pretty far, and now the technology's there. science fiction is being merged, or has been merged, with science fact. And so, well, in other words, what we believe to be scientific fact in terms of theoretical physics is nothing more than science fiction. And what people believe to be some weird conspiracy theory in terms of the flat stationary Earth that we live on, this is the deception. It is intended to belittle our place in the universe, and it's done a great job, honestly. And in terms of this whole transhumanist movement, I wouldn't be surprised if we see people with their, with robot bodies walking around with their heads attached via USB 20.10, cords. Who knows? Anyway, if the globber, doesn't even understand, the globber that you're arguing with doesn't even understand the full spectrum of their very own model that they, purport. For example, the alleged supersonic axial rotation anywhere near the tropics. A lot of globers, if you tell them, so, you believe that the equator is spinning over 1,000 miles an hour, they'll call you a liar, or they'll say that that's not true, when in fact, according to the heliocentric model, that's the truth. Another one would be the fact that during many total lunar eclipses, the sun and the moon have been seen above the horizon in the same sky at the same time during total lunar eclipses, which is geometrically impossible to occur in the heliocentric model, and yet it's explained away by really just bizarre theoretical nonsense that does not account for the fact that many times throughout history it's been documented total lunar eclipses where both the sun and the moon were visible above the horizon in the same sky. So there you have that. But if you tell people about that, globe heads, they will say that you're a liar. But if you actually go and look it up, there's a term for it in the scientific record, and it's happened, some 58 times in recorded eclipse history, so it's not that uncommon. Usually there's about 128 to 130 total solar as well as total lunar eclipses every year. Now, another thing, you can, when you tell people, this about this alleged supersonic axial rotation anywhere near the tropics, and especially at the equator, or show them how the phases of the moon work, because a lot of globe earthers think that the phases of the moon are caused by the Earth's shadow. Honestly, a lot of globe earthers believe that, when obviously the heliocentric model purports that it is the it's just the cycle of the moon orbiting the Earth, and the light reflecting back to us at relatively different angles throughout that cycle. Now, you do get some pretty weird things with the moon. It allegedly takes 27.3 days to orbit the Earth. That's what you always hear. However, it takes about 29 days to make a full lunar cycle, so from new moon to new moon. So that's a little odd, but they say that's because the Earth is moving. However, it could be for a number of things. We won't get into that. That's not the main topic of this here. Anyway, you look at another example would be unfounded beliefs about the distances to the stars, and this example would apply to you, Mr. Hubbard, even according to the mainstream lyrical lobotomists. The nearest visible star is about 4.22 light years away. Polaris is about 450 light years away. And the most distant visible star, now all these numbers are according to the heliocentric model and according to ground-based observation. The most distant visible star from the ground is about 16,308 light years. So again, the nearest visible star is 4.22 light years, allegedly. Polaris is 450 light years, allegedly. And the most distant visible star from the ground is about 16,308 light years, allegedly. So keep those numbers in mind. What I find so funny about this is the fact that the light we're supposedly seeing from the most distant visible star is very old data compared to the star that's only 4 light years away, meaning we're just now seeing where the star allegedly was 16,308 years ago. On the high end of visible stars from the ground. So we honestly have not a frickin' clue where that star is today, according to the heliocentric model. And in fact, that star could have theoretically traveled 1,000,000 miles in some other direction by now, and we won't know it for another 16,000 years. Or that star could have literally exploded 10,000 years ago, and we won't even know it for another 6,000 years, according to the preposterous, absurd heliocentric model. Now, all of this hyperbole and conjecture extraordinaire is found all throughout the heliocentric model. There are no boundaries to the human imagination, and because the stars are so mysterious and NASA has been deceiving people most recently, we've just gotten theoretical sciences have gotten so far off the beaten path in terms of truth and the scientific method and the pursuit of truth that it's just ridiculous. But you really can't use those numbers in terms of the distance of the stars because of what I just mentioned, because it's one of the most distant star is 16,000-year-old data. The nearest star is 4-year-old data. The sun is 8-minute-year-old data, all according to the heliocentric model. So we honestly have no idea, where any of the stars are, especially the more distance of the stars. But the point is, you really can't use these numbers to average the distance between those 3 stars. But under no circumstances is Polaris so far away that it never moves, according to you. The heliocentric model explains that Polaris remains fixed above the polar axis due to a dead-on balls alignment. However, I've already explained that that is impossible to occur for any length of time, for any one star, or for any one spot in space. For one reason, due to the alleged necessary precession, 1 degree every 72 years, which would be extremely noticeable over relatively short periods of time throughout history. You'd have a whole series of North Stars documented throughout history. If you're talking about 1 degree of precession every 72 years. But also, not even these long-term cycles are necessary to disprove the spinning sphere model, at a tilt going around the sun, going around the galaxy. Another way that you can disprove this is the simple act of facing opposite directions in space from dusk until dawn. As well as facing opposite directions in space from winter to summer. This has nothing to do with stellar parallax, but this is the simple result of facing in an opposite direction towards space, as we're supposedly on a spinning, orbiting sphere. So, we're talking about misalignments that should be occurring and don't occur because the world is stationary and the stars are not what you think they are. They're not. Everything is not what you've been led to believe in terms of the Earth and the cosmos, and the universe, the Big Bang. I mean, all of that is it's nonsense, people. I'm sorry to tell you. Now, we will go ahead just for fun. We'll go ahead and based on these numbers, we'll take the average distance between the 3 stars mentioned. Again, the nearest visible star from the ground, the furthest visible star from the ground, and Polaris, using the heliocentric values. The average of those 3 is about 5,587.4 light years away. Now, of course, these numbers are theoretical hogwash dreamed up by intellectually stunted theoretical physicists craving after fortune and glory and recognition throughout the globe Earth history. But using these very numbers, Polaris being allegedly 450 light years away, according to you, then Polaris is only about 8% of the distance of the average of those three stars. And in terms of the furthest visible star, which you claimed Polaris was the furthest visible star, you claimed it was so far, that's why it never moves. Polaris is allegedly 2.7% of the distance to the most distant visible star. Okay? 2.7%. So what this means is your explanation for Polaris remaining fixed above the axis because of its distance is just ridiculous. Now, in order for this to work in your model, in order for Polaris to remain fixed above the axis of our measly, wobbly, arbitrary, pointing North Pole axis, Polaris must be traveling many light years in all sorts of directions throughout the year and throughout the eon and throughout the evening, actually, in order to remain fixed above our measly, arbitrary, wobbly North Pole axis of rotation, according to your model. This is impossible for Polaris to remain fixed above the axis of rotation for any duration in and of itself. To have Polaris remain over the axis from one season to the next also debunks the heliocentric model due to the angles involved, nothing to do with stellar parallax, but it has to do with facing in opposite directions in space from winter to summer. You probably know this, but I'll just go ahead and say it anyway. The Sun allegedly orbits around the Milky Way galaxy along a single plane, which is more or less adherent to the galactic plane. Now, the galaxy is allegedly traveling at some millions of miles an hour like this, but we won't even consider the frame of reference of the galaxy. We'll just say, here's the plane of orbit of the Sun. It's, goes around in a 150 to 250 million year cycle, allegedly, but the path of the Sun is more or less aligned to the galactic equator. Now, the ecliptic, or the plane which the Earth allegedly orbits the Sun around, is offset to the path of the Sun by 60 degrees, right? So what you have is just this really bizarre situation where during one season, visible space would be northwest of the galactic equator, say during the summer, and 6 months later, visible space would be southeast of the galactic equator, say that's winter. And again, it's nothing to do with stellar parallax. The further you place the stars, the worse this problem becomes, because we're talking about facing in one direction towards visible space, and then 6 months later facing a total another direction towards visible space. This applies especially to equatorial stars, but it even applies to stars that you can look at in the northern hemisphere even over the course of an evening. But the point is the fact that all of the stars remain stationary relative to one another. The constellations have never changed. We see repeating cycles, perfect repeating cycles that are just not conducive to a random, chaotic, heliocentric model. Bodies in motion somehow maintaining perfect planes of orbit around other bodies in motion, moving in contrary directions at the same time, and calling that a fixed linear frame of reference is just the most ridiculous thing in the world. You calling Polaris the most distant star is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. And again, if you average the furthest visible star, nearest visible star, and Polaris, Polaris is only about 8% of that average. And in terms of the furthest visible star, Polaris is only 2.7% of that distance. So you were technically off by about 3,700% in your estimate of Polaris in terms of its distance. So that's not scoring too well at all. I don't know where you came up with that idea. Now, the other thing in terms of Polaris, when you also factor in the alleged precession of the equinoxes, considering Polaris has indeed remained fixed as the North Star for all of recorded history, then the precession of the equinoxes categorically could not be caused by this alleged axial precession. The proof is right there with Polaris. If we were experiencing this wobble, this axial precession over 26,000 years, then we couldn't maintain an alignment with any star for 50 or 100 years, or really 200 at the very most, just due to moving 1 degree every 72 years. This absolutely, most certainly would have been noted by astronomers, just as the very minor changes in equatorial stars over long periods have been noted by astronomers. Yet Polaris remains fixed, meaning the cause for the precession of the equinoxes has nothing to do with axial precession whatsoever. It's something entirely different. So there you have that. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. There's no even debate. Axial precession does not exist. The precession of the equinoxes are not caused by the wobble of the Earth's axis. It's just proven by the fact that Polaris doesn't change, that the North Polar axis doesn't regress through its path 1 degree every 72 years. It just doesn't happen. So there you have that. But yeah, being 3,700% wrong in terms of your claims about Polaris being the most distant star, I mean, what qualifies you at all to talk about this? I mean, do you just make stuff up and run with it? And I mean, are you going to retract that? Are you going to correct that? Are you going to come up with any sort of rebuttal as to how Polaris remains fixed above the North Pole? Are you going to come up with any sort of idea as to how a vacuum pushes against our atmosphere with enough force to cause 14.7 pounds of pressure per square inch at sea level? How does a vacuum push against anything? How does zero force pressurize a gaseous body that should be in vacuo? And you say it's this theory of gravity that's nothing more than the dream of a fart. It is a theory dreamed up by Einstein. And for some reason you think that because Einstein thought something, then it's true. Well, I mean, that makes it so that you really need to start checking your premises, because relativity, space-time, gravity, Big Bang, dark matter, dark energy, great attractor, Higgs boson particle, Einstein-Rosen bridges, all of that hogwash, black holes, all of that is just theoretical nonsense. Nuclear bombs, atoms, splitting of atoms, every last bit of this is scientism propaganda, period.
The average star, in terms of science, this is scientific understanding, the average star is 4.3 light years from the Earth. This is the scientific knowledge. I'm just saying this is what's out there, and everyone can verify this.
Star.
The average star is 4.3 light years away. The North Star is said to be 433.8 light years away. That's over 100 times further away. So, Jared, this is what I mean with the flat Earth community, because all night you've been saying I'm not researched. Look, I'm very well researched in a way, because I studied this stuff in school. I was always top of my class, Jared.
I'm trying to
look,
wrong.
the North Star is 100 times further away than the average star. So you can't just say it's just like all the other ones. It's not true.
What you're saying is completely false, Zach. The closest star to us is 4 light years away. The closest star. Okay, so when you say the average star is a couple thousand light years, could be 1 million light years. What stars are you considering when you're taking an average? You're talking about all the stars? That doesn't make any sense. Some stars are billions of light years
further away.
Yes.
Yeah, some stars are billions of light years away. What do you mean?
The North Star is special. It's a lot more distant than the majority of stars in the sky. Anyone can look this up. Look, if you're in the flat Earth and you're interested into this debate right now, look it up after Jeranism and I are done talking.
The furthest star is known, according to the model, is 13.3 billion light years away. So that's
right. So take an average. The average isn't going to come out to 4.
The North Star you said is how many, babe? How many million?
It's between
light
400 and 500.
But millions. So
No. The North Star is 400 or 500 light years away.
Okay, so that's.
But that's not an average. That is, it's a very.
The North Star is also, I forget what they call it in space. It's in a special spot too, supposedly right above the North Pole. But the fact that it is so distant is the reason it appears to never move in the sky. And the point is I hear a lot of flat Earth channels saying that the North Star never moves, and that is proof that we're stationary. But if you look at the mathematics of how far away it is, it's explained why it is what it is. And there's a reason sailors have used it for 1,000 years and probably longer than that to sail the oceans.
You're basically wrecking your channel right now, because this is going to be repeated over and over again. You're going to get shown that you had no clue what you're talking about. So I'm just telling you, I would stop talking about that. Look up the things you're saying first.
Don't look up things that support what you were taught in school, because that's what.
Well, even he's not talking about anything that's close to being correct. The North Star being at the center and not moving has absolutely zero to do with its distance from Earth. Nothing.
It's because we're tilted and spinning.
It's because we're tilted and the axis of the Earth is pointed at the North Star. It wouldn't matter if it was the closest star or the furthest star. It would still be at that spot and not move. It has nothing to do with its distance. And it's actually on a lower end. It's actually on the.
It has everything to do with its distance, because that's how perspective works. It's like if you're standing in front of a tree and you take a step to the right, it looks like the tree. Now you're not looking at the tree anymore. But if you're a great distance away and you take a step to the right, the tree's still right in front of you.
Yeah, parallax, but there is no parallax in the stars. It's not noticeable by the human eye. It's detectable by equipment, but it's not. The human eye can't decipher that. It has nothing to do with what you're talking about.
This is an observable fact of the world we live in. Flat Earth does not want to recognize this, they just want to ignore it. And people such as Eric Dubé, who use false evidence to make their points, Eric Dubé claims that it's just not true, that the stars don't rotate in opposite directions in opposite hemispheres, which is a lie. They do. It's proven. There's all sorts of video evidence you can look at to see. See, that's the difficulty with the Flat Earth research. It requires us to have resources to travel to these places, to observe it with our own eyes. But there's people that have done the work. They've documented the stars, the sky, and you can see. You see different stars rotating in opposite directions in opposite hemispheres. The other point I brought up to Jeranism, a sun's light, a star's light, it has unlimited distance. If the Earth was flat and there was a star above it, which is the sun, it would light up the whole Earth. The sun is not a lamp. The sun's light doesn't just go off a certain distance. You could never have half the world in light and half the world in darkness on a flat Earth. It would either all be light or all be dark at once. I don't even think there would be time zones. And then using mathematics. And I realize Jeranism is very much against mathematics. But using mathematics, it proves the flat Earth false. Jeranism just brushed over the point I made last night. On the flat Earth map, if you fly from Johannesburg, South Africa to Sydney, Australia, on the flat Earth map, you would fly over Asia. When in reality, everyone who takes that flight flies over the ocean the whole time. And not only that, on the flat Earth map, doing the mathematics, the flight from Johannesburg to Sydney would take twice as long as it takes in reality on the flat Earth. If you do the mathematics of what is shown on the flat Earth map, the flight would take twice as long as it actually takes. And what's really sad is when I made this video, some flat earther has been spamming flights from Johannesburg that have stops that go to other places and saying, see, this time's about the same. I mean, that's what's wrong with the flat earth community right there. Just that somebody's even that dumb to try to make that argument. I'm talking about how the non-stop flight flies over the ocean in about 13 hours time. And on the flat Earth map, if you do the mathematics, based on the rate of travel for a commercial air flight, it would take over 22 hours, which it does not. This person went and found flights from Johannesburg to Sydney that have layovers in other cities and said, see, these flights take that long. I mean, how can you even, it's just so embarrassing to even try to make that argument. We're talking about a nonstop flight over the ocean versus flights that have layovers, destinations before it goes there. And see, someone in the flat earth thinks that this is an argument. They think that that proves the earth is flat. A completely nonsensical, ridiculous, horribly thought out argument. So anyway, last night I had to listen to Jeranism and his wife just keep saying, this isn't true, when in fact it is true. It's observable, it's documented. And, it was Jeranism's show, so I was polite the whole time, and sometimes I just let stuff go and didn't even say anything in the back. Like at the beginning, he introduced me by saying that my flat earth research is horrendous, and it's obvious I haven't done the homework. Well, I've done plenty of homework, and I know things that Jeranism, even after spending all these years, still doesn't know. I had to make the point to him that yes, the moon is a sphere, because only a spherical shape can have phases like the moon goes through. He tried to argue that the moon was a two-dimensional object. A two-dimensional object cannot go through phases. Has to be a sphere. And Jeranism has admitted many times before, and he admitted again last night, he has no idea what causes the orbit of the sun or moon. So this is my point. Why are people so passionate about this subject that they cannot prove, and to try and prove in their mind, they have to deny reality? So I just want to play this clip of him and his wife denying that boats go beyond the horizon. We can see them go over the horizon. Something that anyone can observe from any beach in the world. But they wanted to deny it and say that this doesn't happen. Just listen here, Truth Seeker. And then we're going to watch a clip of a boat going over the horizon. Something everyone can observe. Things such as boats going over the horizon, the way the sun rises, the sun sets. These are the very real proofs that we live on a spherical earth.
Okay, exactly. So, but you're saying that it bends into a ball, right? Where's the evidence of that?
You can't have both of those.
Where is there any kind of experiment, lab experiment? Show me an example of water.
Well, that's what we're seeing when a ship goes beyond the horizon.
Okay,
we're seeing it go around. That is the curvature.
Okay, here's the thing, Zach.
This is what we
I've
mean
done
by there's
videos.
no research going on.
I've done videos. Hold on. So have other people that will show you that the boats never go over the curvature.
So his wife kept saying that too. She kept, I'd make points and she'd go, oh, that's so sad. It just shows you haven't done any research. And I just kept thinking, what research are they doing? Are they only looking at evidence that fits their false delusional worldview that the earth is flat?
It's funny that you would mention that in terms of only observing or only researching things that fit your paradigm, because that's exactly the opposite of what we're doing. We're looking at data and following the data where it leads us, and doing away with preconceived notions or laws like the Copernican principle. And when Mrs. says things, things like it's so sad because you haven't researched this, is because, well, for example, there is no curvature, and there's tons of experiments and tons of examples that you can point to which prove this, yet people such as yourself are really guilty of exactly what you just claimed that they've been doing. So essentially, the heliocentric model relies on ignoring observations and data that disagree with your model, and only allowing for consideration observations and data that aligns with your model. And if any data or experimental results come back that disagree with your model, then it is buried by modern science, unfortunately. And there's lots of examples you can cite for that. But it is really ironic, and it is sad, because it is the globe Earth proponents who are refusing to participate in the scientific method, which is trying to prove to yourself whether or not there's curvature. And once you've proven to yourself that there is no curvature, then it's really sort of difficult and ironic to have people such as yourself accusing us of doing exactly what you're doing, which is ignoring evidence and only examining with your blinders on, only examining stuff that you feel aligns with your model. So you'll assume that there's curvature, yet when it's measured for, it doesn't exist, and you say that we're somehow, being biased here, right? I mean, how is that being biased? By taking data, and much to our surprise, at least it was for me at first, much to my surprise, that there is in fact no curvature and no axial rotation. So there is no cherry picking, there is no sort of confirmation bias involved. It's actually very simple. It's as simple as revisiting the assumptions that were crammed into our psyche as children.
Because this is what it is. To think the Earth is flat in 2017, where we now are, you have to truly be delusional. There is no evidence that the Earth is flat. There is all sorts of evidence that the Earth is a sphere.
There's no evidence that the Earth is flat, and there's all sorts of evidence that the Earth is a sphere, right? That's what you claim. Actually, I'll correct you, and what you should have said is that there is no evidence that the Earth is flat and stationary, while there's all sorts of evidence that the Earth is a spinning sphere in the vacuum of space, orbiting the sun, orbiting the galaxy, flying through the cosmos at a gazillion miles an hour. I beg to differ, though. This is sort of like the old ostrich burying his head in the sand, saying there is no evidence of this stampede of buffaloes coming my way. There is no evidence. I don't see it, right? So a couple things I'll just mention is the fact that there is no curvature to, say, 50 or 60 miles of standing water proves that the Earth couldn't be a sphere with the proportions of, 4,000 mile radius. Also, there's lots of experiments that you could do or look at and research that prove that the Earth is stationary. Airy's failure, Michelson-Gailey, the Sagnac experiment, or just fire a potato gun perfectly vertically into the air and see if it comes back at the same angle that it went up.
Oh, I see that one. That one's coming straight down. A little over this way. Oh! That was awesome.
But there's all sorts of evidence that the Earth is stationary and doesn't have any curvature. Now, are you going to cite some evidence that the Earth is, in fact, a spinning sphere in the vacuum of space, orbiting the sun, orbiting the galaxy? Or are you just going to leave it at your claim and just move on?
And for people who don't understand mathematics, which is over 95% of the population, which is why so many people have been sucked into the flat Earth psyop, for people who don't understand mathematics, it becomes all the more challenging to understand the spherical nature. For example, if you listened to the debate last night, Jeranism kept making the point that sea level doesn't make any sense on a spherical Earth. He's saying if there's curvature from Los Angeles to New York, cities that both come to the coast to sea level, he's saying that's impossible on a spherical Earth. And I was saying to him, no, Jeranism, it's not impossible. Think of a ball, think of, the ocean wrapping around the spherical Earth because of gravity, which pulls everything towards the center of its mass.
Okay, this is where I would disagree with Jaron just a little bit. I would say that sea level makes perfect sense on a spherical Earth if you assume that the Earth is a sphere. Okay, so you have to have that assumption first. Now, other than that, it makes no sense whatsoever due to this gravity. that Zachary and other globe heads love to point to as evidence of this spherical Earth and sea level. Now, of course, on a spherical Earth, sea level, there's nothing level about it. It's a mean curve. So sea level is just a complete misnomer for some reason that people have used. So is the word horizon or the word horizontal, whichever one. Both horizon, horizontal, sea level, all of those are huge misnomers, assuming that the Earth is a sphere. Now, the other thing that you have to consider here is gravity, which has never been proven, ever. It is a theory that was constructed with the presumption that the Earth is a sphere in outer space. Gravity is what allows for you to remain stuck to the side of a spinning sphere. It allows the atmosphere to remain adjacent to a vacuum. It allows the moon to orbit around the Earth, connected to the Earth by nothing but a vacuum. Gravity is mass attracting mass, essentially. Now, you can't demonstrate this anywhere in reality unless there's magnetism involved. Certainly, you can demonstrate mass being attracted to mass when there's magnetism involved, but you can sit there all day long. I don't care how massive two objects are, they're never going to attract each other, which is why the entire Cavendish experiments from hundreds of years ago were a lie. Nobody's been able to replicate that so-called experiment, and even if the lead balls in his glorified tool shed did move, there's a million other explanations other than gravity. Gravity does not exist. Gravity is a figment of theory. It's a figment of the imagination of theoretical physicists to apologize or allow for us to live on a spinning sphere. But it isn't proof of anything. What goes up must come down is a certainty here on the physical plane, and gravity is an explanation to explain this on a spherical Earth. So, again, I do sort of disagree with Jaron that, yes, okay, if we assume that the Earth is a sphere, then sea level is a mean curve. However, where I'm with Jaron on this is that the Earth isn't a damn sphere, for crying out loud. It's a plane, and so sea level is actually level. The horizon is actually horizontal. And there's so much evidence to prove this. Between so many of us, we've made thousands of hours of videos proving all of this, disproving curvature, disproving axial rotation, proving that there is no curvature, proving that we're stationary, and yet we're stuck with people saying, pointing to gravity as proof of something, when gravity is a theory that was dreamed up by the dead shill Einstein.
The reason the sea is level and surrounding the spherical Earth, he doesn't understand how there can be curvature and 2 points be level on a sphere. Think about it. There's a ball, right? All the water is being pulled. The space where water meets what we call land, that's what we refer to as sea level. All the water is pulled evenly around the ball. That's why it's at sea level, the same height. And the fact that it's all pulled around a spherical Earth is the reality of this world we live in.
Okay, Zachary K. Hubbard. So you're saying, first of all, you're just way off. Any theoretical physicist, globehead theoretical physicist would just beat you with his gravitational device if he heard you say that, space was causing all of the water to be pulled towards a sphere. Physicists describe gravity as an acceleration, not as a pulling or pushing force. And essentially what you're saying is also wrong according to theoretical physics. Gravity is allegedly the warping of space-time by the mass of the Earth, causing the rectilinear state of space-time to warp and sort of curve around the massive Earth, which causes sort of a displacement of space-time. Like if you were to shove a beach ball underwater, it's going to displace a certain amount of water. Gravity is sort of the same thing in a sense that the mass of the Earth is displacing or warping space-time. Now, space-time is a theory, and it's another one of those theories by Einstein that people point to as proof of something, but it is merely the imaginings of a single person. You're claiming that nothing, a vacuum, is pushing against our atmosphere when technically our atmosphere should be evaporated out into the infinitude of space, assuming the heliocentric model. But you're saying that a vacuum is pushing down towards the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is actually what's pushing down on the sea at sea level with about 14.7 pounds of pressure per square inch. So gravity has really big problems with it because the Earth is allegedly spinning at 1,037.5 miles an hour at the equator, while spinning 0.0 miles per hour at the North Pole, according to you. Now, at the North Pole, an observer, or say a ton of coffee, would be on top of the axis, parallel with the axis, spinning 0.0 miles per hour, or technically half the speed as an hour hand on a clock. Now, on the other hand, an observer or a ton of coffee at the equator should be spinning, like I said, over 1,000 miles per hour, standing 4,000 miles away from the axis of rotation underfoot, perpendicular to the axis, while zipping along that parabolic curve of the Earth, dropping 135 miles per hour compared to a tangent line from the base point. Okay, and so gravity is allegedly powerful enough to keep all of the waters of the oceans stuck to the side of a sphere spinning 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, and yet there is no major difference between weight on a scale between the equator and the North Pole. So this right here debunks the theory of gravity. People or a ton of coffee should weigh hundreds of thousands of times more at the North Pole due to the lack of centrifugal force which is generated at the equator. Gravity is only necessary if you assume that the Earth is a spinning sphere in outer space, and since there's no curvature, nor is the Earth spinning, then gravity is unnecessary. It is a phantom of theory, and it actually doesn't exist. Density and buoyancy is what causes things to, higher density objects to fall, lower density objects to rise, such as a helium balloon, and the nudge for higher density objects to fall is not caused by gravity, which is theoretical nonsense, but it is caused by electromagnetic forces. Again, I've touched on this already in this video, but the Earth holds a static electric charge, and static electric charge is always attractant or attractive, regardless of the polarity or the charge of the object that it is attracting. And so there you have the necessary downward tendency or nudge for higher density objects to fall, lower density gases like helium or hot air balloons to rise. So with all that being said, you must prove the spinning spherical Earth first before you can point to gravity as anything. Gravity doesn't exist, period. Prove it otherwise. There is no evidence for gravity. It is theory.
And for anyone who just denies that because they can't understand it, that doesn't make the Earth flat. I just could not get behind how Jaron is. I couldn't even understand how he was so perplexed by what sea level is on a spherical Earth. Everyone should be able to understand what we're told. Even if you disagree with it, you should understand the model. If there's a spherical Earth and there's water that's the majority of the planet, and it's all being pulled towards the center, it's going to become level, as it does in this world.
Okay, so here we go, Zachary K. Hubbard. We're going to define level. Level is used as a noun, a horizontal plane or line with respect to the distance above or below a given point. 2, a position on a real or imaginary scale of amount, quantity, extent, or quality. Example, a high level of unemployment. Synonyms, quantity, amount, extent, measure, degree, volume, size, magnitude, intensity, a proportion. Quote, a high level of unemployment. It can be used as an adjective, having a flat and even surface without slopes or bumps. Example, we had reached level ground. Synonyms, flat, smooth, even, uniform, plain, flush, plumb. 2, at the same height as someone or something else. His eyes were level with hers. Synonyms, aligned with, on the same level as, on a level with, at the same height as, in line with. Example, his eyes were level with hers. Verb, a given flat and even surface to. Example, or rather, give a flat and even surface to. Example, contractors started leveling the ground for the new power station. Synonyms, make level, level out, level off, make even, even out, make flat, flatten, smooth, smooth out, make uniform, tilt the pan to level the mixture, as an example. Secondly, as a verb, begin to fly horizontally after climbing or diving. Okay, so that was level. Now, let's go into the definition of mean curvature, which is what you believe sea level is.
In mathematics, the mean curvature of h of a surface S is an extrinsic measure of curvature that comes from differential geometry and that locally describes the curvature of an embedded surface in some ambient space, such as Euclidean space. The concept was introduced by Sophie Germain in her work on elasticity theory. It is important in the analysis of mineral surfaces, which have a mean curvature 0, and the analysis of physical interfaces between fluids, such as soap films, which, by the Young Laplace equation, have constant mean curvature. Definition. Let P be a point on the surface S. Each plane through P containing the normal line to S cuts S in a plane curve. Fixing a choice of unit normal gives a signed curvature to that curve. As the plane is rotated, always containing the normal line, that curvature can vary, and the maximal curvature and minimal curvature K2 and K1, maximal curvature K1 and minimal curvature K2 are known as the principal curvatures of S. The mean curvature at P epsilon S is the average of the principal curvatures. Spivak 1999, Volume 3, Chapter 2, hence the name, h equals 1 over 2 times k1 plus k2. More generally, Spivak 1999, Volume 4, Chapter 7, for a hypersurface T, the mean curvature given as h equals 1 over n omega, and I just don't even know how to read that, I'm sorry, I'm not getting into all that. More abstractly, the mean curvature is the trace of the second fundamental form divided by n, or equivalently the shape operator. Additionally, the mean curvature h may be written in terms of the covariance derivative as h something n equals gij upside down triangle I upside down triangle j times x, using the Gauss-Weingarten relations where x times x is a smoothly embedded hypersurface, something n a unit normal vector, or n and beyond, a unit normal vector, and gij, the metric tensor. A surface is a minimal surface if and only the mean curvature is 0. Furthermore, a surface which evolves under the mean curvature of the surface S is said to obey a heat-type equation called the mean curvature flow equation. The sphere is the only embedded surface of constant positive mean curvature without boundary or singularities. However, the result is not true when the condition, quote, embedded surface, unquote, is weakened to, quote, immersed surface, end quote.
So, that was the definition of mean curvature. Basically, it's absolutely nothing like what you described. It's actually very complex mathematics to figure up mean curvature, and in fact it makes a whole lot more sense to this speaker that sea level is level, the horizon is horizontal, and that mean curvature is something that can theoretically be applied to a hypothetically spherical Earth, but is nothing of the sort level based on the definitions. So by definition, level and mean curvature are mutually exclusives. Okay, so let's please stop using the term sea level if you're a glober, and you're going to have to change that because it's an oxymoron. Sea level in a globe Earth sense is an oxymoron. That's like saying curve level. Yeah, it's a curve level. Two opposite things, two mutually exclusive ideas, cannot be used in scientific arguments for the shape of the Earth. I'm sorry. I call total foul on the phrase sea level in a spherical Earth hypothesis.
There's all sorts of landmass below the ocean, that once upon a time was above the ocean. But over time, the water level has been rising because we're coming out of an ice age.
Okay, I don't disagree with you that there are areas of the Earth that were once above sea level that are now below sea level. This may or may not be because we're coming out of an ice age. The point is that flooding is not exclusive to a sphere. Okay, there are lots of what appear to be ancient sites that are, very, very deep in the ocean, off the coast of China and other places. Ancient civilizations are found, remnants are found underwater, which does lend some credence to the great flood stories and such, told of in all ancient cultures, not just the Judeo-Christian sort of biblical culture, but all ancient cultures tell ancient tales, even myths of a worldwide flood. And so this is not at all exclusive to a sphere whatsoever. Now, what you're looking at here is an animation of the spinning spherical Earth without any ocean. So if you can imagine, hypothetically, the spherical Earth with all of the water totally sucked out of it, it's not very spherical anymore, is it? And so this really does raise some questions about this whole shtick of gravity, that it is this sort of leveling factor or creative force in all of the universe, mashing together and attracting together mass and mashing it into perfect spheres. Yet somehow the the high density rock and lava underneath the water is certainly not spherical whatsoever. It looks more like a misshapen asteroid. And it is allegedly the water that fills it up that makes it, this perfect sphere. Now, honestly, this doesn't make any sense in a gravitic situation. They claim that the Earth is so many billions of years old, and it formed out of essentially stardust coalescing into planet-sized objects that are held to the sun by gravity, held into their orbits by gravity. And one of the biggest problems with this is that the gases that allegedly formed the planets were, more or less in the same spot where the planets formed. How was gravity holding those gases in place in this infinite vacuum when a planet-sized object is needed to maintain a gravitic relationship between the sun? It's totally non sequitur. Planet formations disprove the heliocentric model. But these gases allegedly coalesced into large objects which were molten sort of states, high pressures, high volcanism, sort of a very changing, almost fluid Earth, and eventually coalescing and cooling into the rock and metal and that sort of thing that we're used to today. And somehow liquid water is able to stick to the surface because it's far enough away from the host star to where water isn't boiled away. It also has the correct barometric pressure so that water isn't boiled away. It's also not so distant from the host star that the liquid state water is impossible. All the water would be frozen, or if the barometric pressure is too high, then liquid water is impossible. So, according to all of this heliocentric theory, the globular Earth with liquid water is a very sort of lucky situation to begin with. There's lots and lots of very lucky coincidences involved with the heliocentric theory. I would invite you to check out some of my other videos to look more into that. But at the end of the day, the Earth isn't a sphere. Even according to the globe earthers, it's not a sphere. It's sort of this, bizarre shaped asteroid-looking thing. And yet, when you fill it up with water, that mean curve makes it a perfect sphere, a perfectly level curve, right? So all of this theory that you believe in starts with the Big Bang and ends with gravity, and there is no proof for either of those. You have to go with the assumption that the Earth is a spinning sphere, and when measured for, there isn't any curvature nor axial rotation, and so this whole idea of gravity pulling water towards the center mass of the Earth and gravity shaping the Earth into a perfect sphere is malarkey, even according to the very heliocentric model. You know, suck out the oceans and you do not have anything close to a sphere. And again, having an ice age and floods or earthquakes that cause entire shelves of tectonic plates to, you know, drop or shift, none of that is exclusive to a sphere at all. So, I mean, that's what I mean when I say that globe earthers seem to think that everything that happens under the sun is exclusive to a sphere. Well, the sky's blue, therefore the earth is a sphere. The moon appears to be a sphere, therefore the earth is a sphere. Water is level, therefore the earth is a sphere. What goes up must come down, therefore the earth is a sphere. Whatever. I mean, jeez.
Right? So water constantly rising, more and more land masses getting covered up. But as it rises, it all comes to the same height, and that's what we call sea level. So anyway, we just heard them say that there's no evidence that a ship sets over the horizon. Let's just finish by watching this. And again, you want 4 more proofs that the earth is a sphere and not flat. I'm going to link all of these short videos in the description. They're all undeniable.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're saying that there are 4 things that easily prove that the Earth is a spinning sphere in outer space, yet you refuse to list them. You give links. If they're so simple and undeniable, why don't you just rattle them off real quick? Is it because you don't understand them, or are they as undeniable as your theory about the North Pole star being the most distant star, which is why it remains fixed above the North Polar axis for all of history, when in fact you were over 3,000% wrong in your estimation of the distance of Polaris being the most distant star? So, in other words, the most distant visible star, according to the heliocentric model, is 3,700% further than Polaris is alleged to be. So that's how far off you were on that. Are they as undeniable as that god-awful nonsense that you pulled out of your rear end? I don't even know where you came up with that. If something so simple, such as a spinning sphere, it would be easy to prove for a child. Yet you have to refer to these different videos, and you can't even give even just a rapid-fire explanation of what it is, you know, exactly that you're talking about. So, you know, whatever. That doesn't do your argument any justice. You won't even describe these proofs that you're talking about. And I would submit it's because either you don't understand them or they are not proofs. And I refuse to look at the links. And you had mentioned the ships going over the horizon. That also is not exclusive to a sphere. The laws of perspective dictate that the bottom portion of the ship will appear to merge with the horizon prior to the top portion of the ship. Then, of course, you have atmospheric lensing, which causes sort of a mirage situation. The further out the ship gets, where you get sort of a reflection mirror image of the that's a whole nother topic, but there's atmospheric distortion that also leads us to believe that a ship is going over a curve when it recedes from our view. However, when you actually look at this objectively, you'll realize that the laws of perspective coupled with atmospheric lensing absolutely 100% explain why ships appear to go over a curve. It is sort of an optical illusion coupled with the laws of perspective and the fact that not only are our eyes convex lenses, but we also all walk around with a giant atmospheric convex lens all the way around us. And when a ship goes out to sea, the atmospheric particulates and such are much more prevalent than, say, in the desert. And so it is understandable why Christopher Columbus would have thought, you know, the mass of ships receding after the hull was proof of a spherical Earth. However, if you do study this and study the things that I've mentioned, atmospheric lensing, atmospheric refraction, and the actual laws of perspective, I would suggest maybe read Zetetic Astronomy for some very good explanations of this and proofs of this. It all makes perfect sense upon a plane. And when you point to things like the Chicago skyline from over 50 miles away across Lake Michigan, that is excellent proof that the Earth isn't a sphere, because again, water always maintains its level, even if you consider that level a curve. That curvature doesn't exist. It is actually level. And this is also proven by radio shots that have been verified at over 100 miles away, which is the radio towers, radio frequency towers that are transmitting and receiving data back and forth need direct line of sight. So it's not like they can bounce it off of the ionosphere or a satellite to get these 100-mile shots, direct line of sight shots between radio towers. So the evidence is all over the place. You just you have to unbury your head from the sand. Or your rear, in order to understand this, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, because it is simply participating in the scientific method.
And you know what? I tried to make one other point to Jeranism last night that he played naive on. I was explaining how flat earth videos don't get suppressed. You look at all the flat earth channels, their videos have big views, tons of likes, hardly any dislikes. Anytime you make a video disproving the flat earth psyop, it gets attacked by trolls and bots.
Okay, so let me prove to you that you're 100% wrong about this, and that in fact it is the mainstream channels which are being propped up by YouTube and Google, and the actual truth, the static plane truth channels that are indeed being suppressed. We're having our view counts removed, we're having our subscribers removed, we're having our videos being hard to find even by our subscribers, and I'll prove you this real quick. Now, I don't have that many subscribers. I've got about 17,000 and some change subscribers, but what my point is if you go into my videos, and we'll just I'll show you my video manager here. You'll notice that a lot of the videos will even go back some distance in time. This is from the 11th, so that had been about a week or so ago, over a week ago, getting 4,000 views. Now, this has all changed recently since November, where it used to be if I released a video, at least, within a week or two, my subscribers would have seen it, right? And yeah, I do have some videos that get big hits. Like, for example, we'll go back to October of 2016. The documentary that I did so far right now has 158,000 views, which is okay. And it doesn't have this awesome like to unlike ratio that you claim that we have. Now, I will say that there are bots out there and people such as Tim Osmond who claim to have over 500 YouTube accounts who are doing things like this to videos in order to make them look bad. But there are situations where I'll put out videos that have hundreds of likes to one dislike, and so that does happen because what we're talking about happens to be the truth. But just to give you an example of where this was in October of 2016, and this video performed fairly well. It was an hour and 13-minute long documentary, which was part one of a series. Part two of the series, which I released just about a week or two later, has now gotten half the views as that. That was still in October, so that one did pretty well. Then you can see this third one had a copyright strike issue, so that one still only has 5,000 views. Mind you, I do have over 17,000 subscribers. Not bragging about this, but typically you'll see at least your subscribers, your subscriber base count viewing the video over a period of 3 or 4 months eventually. Okay. Now going into the next section of the same documentary series, that one did even worse than the second part. This was still at end of October, and I think this was around the time of the algorithm change, got 20,000 views. Okay, and then the final section of the documentary series, which happened November 3rd, did a little bit better than the fourth section of the documentary series. Then you can see after November, everything just sort of really goes down. Very rarely do you see a video that even exceeds 10,000 hits on my channel, when technically, I should be seeing, around 20,000 hits after a few weeks or a month on video. Now, another thing that they've done is YouTube is actually removing view counts from videos, and I'll just show you a private video real quick that I know for a fact had at least 3 or 4 views at one point in the past when I posted it, and that specific video has gone down to 0. Okay, so here it is. Here is the video. Which went from at least a few views down to 0. And so what that tells me is it confirms things that I've noticed about videos, which, I do sort of keep track of this because I spend a lot of time on this. And it seems like I'll have videos where I remember performing very well, like having tens of thousands of hits, and then finding that video dropping down to like less than 5,000 hits. And you could say that it's all in my head, maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, but when I see that one single private video going from several views down to 0, that really just proves to me that YouTube is removing view counts from videos. Okay, and I don't hear any mainstream channels complaining about this, although there are mainstream channels complaining about, the whole subscriber ring the bell thing and whatnot, but for you to claim that Glober Earth Truth channels are being suppressed while Static Plain Truth channels are being bolstered is ridiculous. Now, what I will say is that the Static Plain Falsity channels, like the ones who are pushing misinformation and poor information, are getting really, really heavily trafficked. So are the channels that are brand new channels who are merely re-uploading content of others from a year ago are getting a whole lot of exposure. But in terms of the content creators who are really just kicking the crap out of the heliocentric model and proving things well, are getting definitely unfavorable treatment from Google YouTube. One example would be one of my favorite channels is My Perspective, who is now totally down, and a few months ago had all their videos removed. Another big one was ODD TV, or ODD Reality now, that had his channel completely taken down. So you don't see that happening with Glober channels. I'm finding it so hard to upload a video due to just the most ridiculous copyright claims and having to dispute things that are well within the realm of the Fair Use Act laws. So, and I've proven that to myself at least. I've shown it. At least subscribers are being unsubscribed without their consent. And also the people who are subscribed to my channel are finding it hard to find my videos, which that did not used to be the case. That's all very recent, and you'll see channels who are pro-globe proponent channels making meteoric rises, just doing very, very well all of a sudden. And I totally disagree. I think that you are just really way off base on this one. And would you care to provide any evidence of your claim, or you just make claims and that's it?
Because YouTube is here to attack truth and help spread lies and disinfo, which all of us who are real truth seekers and speakers know. But Jeranism, he just wanted to shrug this off and just say, oh, well, it's because he's invested in a lie. Jeranism has invested in a lie.
Okay, I'm just going to have to totally disagree with you on that. I've known Jaren, had many long talks with Jeranism for the last almost 2 years, and he is absolutely not invested in a lie. That is the opposite of the truth. that makes you a liar. What he's invested in, and what many others, such as myself and thousands of others, have invested themselves in, is the pursuit of truth. And what we found is that the theoretical model of all things that we've been taught, our entire lives, are the lie. And unfortunately, you are unable to see the truth right under your nose, directly underneath your feet, because of this deception. You are incapable of theorizing, just for argument's sake, hypotheses that fall outside of your current belief system. And so, Jaren's motto is sort of, be kind, don't lie to each other, open your mind, there's truth inside. He's committed himself to, and as well as myself, completely reevaluating everything that we thought was true, starting with the very ground that we walk upon. And what we found, much to our surprise, and without any contrary evidence over the last 2 years, that indeed theoretical sciences, theoretical physics, the Big Bang Theory, gravity, dark matter, dark energy, galaxies, all of this is theoretical folly. And unfortunately, we are invested in the truth. In spite of the repercussions it has on our personal lives, on our business lives, on our reputations, and frankly, we don't give a damn, my dear, because we're standing up for the truth. Do you really think that people would put their reputations at stake? I know that I wouldn't put my reputation at stake for a complete and bogus lie, such as global warming. So, how dare you? That's a complete misrepresentation of everything that Jarenism and really the Flat Earth movement represents. All of the other deceptions in the world, starting from, the Big Bang all the way to the Federal Reserve scam and everything in between, hinges on the Copernican principle or the heliocentric theory, period, which happens to be the greatest deception of all time.
Cognitive dissonance is what plagues the flat earth community. They don't want to look at the realities of this world we live in, and they want to delude themselves with a belief that has no evidence. More evidence that the flat earth is a psyop is just how YouTube treats videos that expose the flat earth lies. Jarenism said that all these videos prove nothing. Wrong. They all prove that the earth is a sphere. Proof of curvature right here. Proof of how the stars operate on this earth right here. Impossible on a flat earth. Again, proof that the sun could never operate as the flat earth community is saying it operates, like it's a lamp in your room. And again, the mathematics of the flat earth prove it to be false. So let's finish up here by showing a boat going over the horizon. Until next time, Truth Seeker.
So what, you can just say proof of this and proof of that, and that proves a thing? Okay, well, proof that the horizon is horizontal. Proof the earth isn't spinning.
Oh, I see that one. I thought that was going straight down. No, a little over this way. Oh! That was awesome.
Proof that gravity is a theoretical fantasy. Proof that the mathematics of the spherical earth don't work. So there you go. I disproved all those things. Actually, they have been proven, but you'd have to probably watch a few hundred hours of videos. I've put some cards and links in the description for your convenience. And okay, we don't need to watch boats going over the horizon for the umpteenth time, so we'll just go ahead and end it at that. I'll invite you to watch a couple of my documentary series, which again I have linked up and put cards in for. So yeah, this whole boats over the horizon thing has been debunked years ago. So yeah, doesn't prove a thing. Wish you the best, y'all out there. who'd like to support this channel, you can do so more easily via PayPal to paypal.me/themorgile1 or directly through PayPal to jonelance@gmail.com or through fan funding on YouTube on The Morgile. So anyway, thanks so much for your time. God bless you all. Spread the word, spread the world, and peace.
Maintain is a psychological operations meant to divide, distract, and discredit the truth community.
Wow. Okay, so you're going to take the position that the flat earth is a psyop. Okay, let's just say hypothetically, for argument's sake, I'm not asking you to be a flat earther. I'm just saying hypothetically for argument's sake, let's just say that it's true. Let's just say that the Earth isn't actually a spinning sphere in outer space, but it is indeed a stationary plane. No curvature, no axial rotation, no orbiting, no galactic frame of reference, no Big Bang, none of that. Let's just suppose, for argument's sake, that that is all theory, which indeed it is. All of that is theory. And let's just suppose, for argument's sake, that flat Earth happens to be true. For you to say that that is a psyop is the most ironic, close-minded, it would be comical were it not so sad, situation I've ever seen. It's hard to find an analogy to show the level of cognitive dissonance and just refusal to look at evidence and refusal to follow the scientific method, and yet call others who are following the scientific method science-denying idiots. It's preposterous. But let's just assume that it's true. Let's assume that the Earth is flat and stationary and we're right. Let's just say hypothetically that you're wrong about this. Then the psyop is definitely the whole idea of this heliocentric Copernican principle Big Bang model, where the universe, in quotes, is governed by gravity and chaos and mere chance, and life itself essentially was at one point inanimate soup made out of minerals that sprang into existence, somehow writing billions of lines of DNA code to form even a single cell organism. That makes perfect sense. Yet, when you do start to look at the evidence objectively and start to consider that perhaps you may have been fooled about everything, starting with the Big Bang, leading to the formation of stars, planets in general, the lights in the night sky, that's all the first-hand evidence you have of space. Now, there has been a huge propaganda campaign going on for our entire lives, really since the early 50s, to indoctrinate people into this really firm belief in infinite space and alien worlds, and that the Earth is just this insignificant spinning rubble pile, in some galaxy, one of billions of galaxies, making us the definition of insignificant, which really leads to a line of thought that is sort of nihilistic, if you will, meaning that nothing has any meaning. In fact, I would argue that the heliocentric model and everything that comes with it is the root cause of nihilism itself, if you want to know the truth. And, although I do identify as a Christian, and I have my entire life, I've held atheistic viewpoints my entire life simply because I have adhered to the standard scientific models of things for the majority of my life. Now, in the last 2 years, I've happened to look at evidence objectively. Two simple things, and I know you argue this, is the lack of curvature and the lack of axial rotation. These two things alone, debunk the heliocentric model, regardless of what you think the stars in the southern skies are doing. If the toughest things to get across to people is not flat Earth. One of my specialities is disproving the heliocentric model. I mean, it's really quite easy to do. And so if you can prove that the Earth isn't a spinning sphere in outer space, then is it really necessary to even prove flat Earth? Or should we, just take that, the total debunking of the heliocentric model as at least a starting point to start looking at other ideas, to start looking at other hypotheses? I mean, even if one single premise of the heliocentric model is debunked, then the rest of it falls. I mean, it all rides on, every bit of the heliocentric theory, whether it's axial rotation, the precession of the equinoxes, the speed of the spin at the equator, allegedly, the cycle of the moon. I mean, all of this stuff has to be precisely what they say it is, and if one single thing is shown to be false, then the rest of it falls apart. Now, that's the beautiful thing about the flat Earth reality, is it's very plain and simple. The Earth is simply a stationary plane, and we flat Earthers don't claim to know what the stars are. And frankly, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, you may not know this, talking to people like Zachary K. Hubbard, but you don't know what the stars or the sun are either. Now, you claim to believe in a theoretical thing called hot atomic fusion, which has never been demonstrated in a lab. It is theoretical, and so for you to say that you know that the sun and the stars are hot atomic fusion is ridiculous. Hot atomic fusion only exists in the realm of theory. In fact, if you look at the evidence, even atomic fission or an atomic bomb, such a thing exists merely in the realm of theory and propaganda. And the only thing that we have that is realistic in terms of nuclear, which is a misnomer, is nuclear energy, which I've touched on this in other videos, but you're merely taking a radioactive isotope, encasing it into a small area which creates heat. That energy is transferred to boil water, and then the steam turns a turbine, so you just have a very expensive advanced form of steam power. There's no splitting of theoretical atoms involved at all. And so I guess what I'm getting at is most of what we were taught in school in terms of theoretical physics, everything from the atom to the atom bomb to the planet Jupiter to the sun and how it was formed and how galaxies were formed and how dark matter, theoretically holds galaxies together, all the way back to the Big Bang and everything in between, including evolution, all of that is conjecture. And all of that is backed by nothing more than circumstantial evidence, confirmation bias, and a world full of people who were tricked since they were toddlers into believing in the most absurd, preposterous thing, such as you live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere in the vacuum of outer space. So let's get started on this video. I'm going to roll this button, and I may end up cutting in some other clips as well of Zachary K. Hubbard's genius sarcasm there.
Hey, truth seekers, welcome back. Zach here. Last night, Monday, January 23rd, 2017, I went on Jeranism's radio program to have a discussion about the flat Earth which I made.
If there is no curvature, then the lights in the night sky are not what we've been told. We're not on a planet spinning around a galaxy like all the other lights in the night sky. Even if the moon is a sphere, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Earth is a sphere whatsoever. That's circumstantial evidence. It's a leap of confirmation bias. And, when you do test for curvature, it doesn't exist. When you make physical experiments, test for axial rotation.
Oh, I see that one. That one's coming straight down. No, a little over this way. Oh! That was awesome.
Supersonic axial rotation at the equator and even in the United States, it simply doesn't exist. So the fact is that you are indeed wrong, and the fact that you claim that flat Earth is a psyop is, again, it's very ironic, sad, ridiculous, and it makes me wonder about you, and I really hope that you're able to really put the lens over the heliocentric model. Really scrutinize your belief systems, because again, if one single tenet or premise of the heliocentric model is shown to be fallacious, especially when NASA is caught faking just about everything from their inception, starting with the Nazi origins of NASA, leading up to the faked Apollo hoax missions, then on into the faked Pioneer 10 missions, unmanned mission to Jupiter, allegedly traveling almost 400 million miles through 90 million miles of errant asteroids through the asteroid belt, and beaming back pictures what are obvious hoaxes of this planet Jupiter, that this is what NASA's been up to, and this is what they're still up to, raking in $20 billion a year now from taxpayer money alone for planned trips to Mars that will never happen. It's always in the next 20 years. They were planning trips to Mars since they've had that shtick since the 70s and the 80s. So what makes you think they're going to take your ass to Mars? I mean, it's ridiculous. So anyway, I just want to let you know, a psyop, a psychological operation from the government is going to be something that is going to have an end result that the government wants. Now, you claim that that end result is to muddy the waters of the truth movement. Now, let's just suppose that the Earth is actually flat and stationary. Now, how could that truth, this ultimate truth, how could this truth be muddying the waters of any truth movement? This is the greatest deception of the entire world, and it really does encompass and house all of the other deceptions, everything from the Freemasons and the Illuminati running the world through the Vatican, the Washington, D.C., and the City of London, citadels, city-states, the trifecta of power. You may include Israel in there as well. These entities, this sort of maritime admiralty corporation that's running the world through sort of inverted fascism or corporate fascism, corpo-fascism, these entities, the last thing that they want is an aware, awake public. And when people wake up to the fact that the Earth isn't a spinning sphere, and all of theoretical science, including Einstein and all of his bizarre theories of space and time being an intermesh fabric of nothing, all of this is malarkey. And, Einstein was pushed and promoted sort of like the Backstreet Boys, or like a boy band, as this genius, when in fact, he was a patent clerk. He dropped out of high school. He was known to beat his wife. He was known, people that knew him claimed, his teachers, his people that knew him claimed that he was no genius. He merely stole other people's ideas during his time as a patent clerk and took credit for them. But that's besides the point. It really just goes to show that this truth, this flat earth truth, as crazy as it sounds, I know how stupid it sounds, trust me, when you realize that your entire education has been one large deception, then people like yourself claiming that this is a psyop to steer people away from the truth is the most preposterous, ridiculous thing. And in fact, if there is government involvement with the flat earth movement, it would be people holding your position, which would be people trying to hold others back from looking at the evidence. I'm not asking anyone to be a flat earther. I'm simply asking people to look at the evidence objectively, and I don't mean Wikipedia the Flat Earth Society and find some preposterous, ridiculous malarkey like gravity is caused by the Earth accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second. That's the sort of ridiculous, red herring, bullshit arguments that misinformation campaigns come up with in order to discredit the truth. Now, the fact is, what goes up must come down isn't argued by flat earthers. However, it is the theory of Einsteinian gravity as a warping of space-time that causes what goes up to come down. Now, in the flat earth model, whether you're aware of this or not, the ultimate cause for what goes down is in fact the natural laws of density and buoyancy. So higher density objects will tend down, while lower density gases and objects like helium will tend up. And there still must be a nudge for density and buoyancy to work. Another example would be a 1,000-ton ship floating on water, or a fairly heavy airplane flying through the air, or a hot air balloon raising in the air. This is all governed by density and buoyancy, has nothing to do with gravity. Now, in order for density and buoyancy to work, you have to have a tendency for higher density objects to find their way down, and that tendency is not gravitic, it's actually electromagnetic. Okay, and this has recently been discovered and sort of uncovered and explained by a few people, one of them being Bob Nodell. And the way that I understand it is that and I've understood this for quite a while, that the Earth is a capacitor plate. This is something that Nikola Tesla was talking about ages ago, but the Earth is a capacitor plate. It holds a static electric charge, and static electric charge is always an attractant charge, sort of like a magnetic charge. However, static electric charge is always attractant, and you have electric potential in proportion with altitude, which I believe is 100 volts per meter, and that is exactly the nudge that you need for gravity, or that nudge for density and buoyancy to allow for denser objects to find their way down and less dense objects to find their way up. So, the point is, we do have scientific, rational explanations for lots of things in the flat earth model. However, we, the best of us, or the most honest of us, refuse to speculate. For example, I refuse to say that there's a dome in the sky. There may be. I don't think that there is. I haven't seen evidence for it, but I'll leave that possibility open. Now, we are certainly allowed to speculate or theorize, but when we're talking about debates, flat versus sphere, we don't want to get into too much speculation. We want to stick to basics. And again, curvature and axial rotation are two very basic ones that, based on some of the arguments that I've seen you make, you're really basing this on how light is reaching your eye, especially over like 50 or 60 miles away, which technically should be impossible on a sphere. But we'll get into your video. I'll stop with my little rant here. But how dare you call the truth a distraction from the truth? I mean, that's so ridiculous. Your ignorance of this topic is a distraction of the truth. What is up, everybody? John the Morgile here, doing a video response to one of the most appalling, despicable displays of vulgar ignorance and just sheer globe-headedness and stubbornness that I've really seen in a long time, crammed into 15 minutes. So, I mean, that really says a lot when you can get that much liarrhea and ignorance crammed into 15 minutes. The reason I'm doing this is a friend of mine, Jason, texted me today and asked me if I had seen the debate last night, which would have been Monday, January the 23rd, on Jeranism Raw between Jeranism and Zachary K. Hubbard, which, I told my friend Jason I had not. I actually still haven't seen the debate. And honestly, I wasn't really too familiar with Zachary K. Hubbard. The name sort of rings a bell, right? It sort of rang a bell, but I haven't seen his work, never spoken with him, not familiar with him. And so what I did do is I just sort of checked him out on YouTube, and the first video that I found of his was this called The Delusional Flat Earth Community, Afterthoughts on Jeranism Debate About the Flat Earth PSYOP. And I'll put a link to that in the descriptions, as well as a link to the debate that he had with Jaron. First off, I'll say that I feel sorry for people like Zachary K. Hubbard because they are unable to humor theories or consider hypotheses that are outside of what they believe due to stubbornness and due to essentially a lifetime of programming mandated by the federally run school system, by the school curriculum. And so, it's the major PSYOP, the terrible deception, the huge mother of all PSYOPs actually is the whole heliocentric Copernican principle, Big Bang evolution theory, theories. I mean, those are the PSYOPs that have been implanted into our ID, into our psyche since we were very young children, and that's a real shame. Now, the beauty of it is that our generation has been blessed with this revelation that there is actually another way of looking at things than the Copernican principle. Because to be very honest, the Copernican theory, which scientists throughout history do have a bent towards, it is a law of physics, this Copernican principle, this mediocrity principle, this law that states that the Earth must not hold any special or significant or unique or even remotely significant place in the universe. That is a law of physics, and so by definition, theoretical physicists have a bent towards the opposite of science, because science is supposed to entail humoring different hypotheses to see which better match reality. And the way that you do this is through experiments and following data, following the facts where they lead you. And unfortunately, theoretical physics based on a Copernican principle is the opposite of science, because people like Zachary Hubbard just simply refuse to consider theories that are outside of their scope of reality. Now, I will get to rolling this clip and rebutting Zachary Hubbard as we go along, but I will say that one of